Hey ambitious souls. Meet Dominic Blackthorne, the billionaire alpha who dominates the boardroom and rules the supernatural world from the shadows of Manhattan's elite. With assets worth $12 billion and senses sharp enough to detect deception from across a conference table, he's built an empire that bridges two worlds. But when brilliant corporate strategist Elena Reyes walks into his boardroom with fire in her eyes and challenge in her voice, his carefully controlled existence shatters. She's everything he never knew he needed, and the one woman who could destroy everything he's built. Money can buy anything, except the one woman destined to be his mate. Chapter 1. The 68th floor of Blackthorne Tower hummed with a kind of power that made lesser men tremble. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Manhattan, while imported Italian marble reflected the amber glow of custom lighting. This was Dominic Blackthorne's domain, a temple to modern ambition where billion-dollar deals were forged and corporate empires conquered. Dominic stood motionless behind his ebony desk, his heightened senses cataloging every detail of the woman who'd just entered his office. Elena Reyes moved with the confidence of someone who'd never backed down from a fight, her charcoal blazer tailored to perfection, designer heels clicking against marble with military precision. The scent that followed her, jasmine and determination with an undertone of barely contained defiance, made his wolf stir with interest. Ms. Reyes. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. Your reputation precedes you. She met his gaze without flinching, those dark eyes assessing him with the same intensity he was using on her. As does yours, Mr. Blackthorne. Though I suspect the most interesting parts don't make it into Forbes. Dangerous. The thought whispered through his mind as his wolf recognized something primal in her challenge. In his 34 years, no one, human or otherwise, had ever spoken to him with such casual dismissal of his power. It should have irritated him. Instead, it sent heat coursing through his veins. Please sit. He gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk, noting how she chose the one that kept her back to the wall, a warrior's instinct he recognized and respected. I've reviewed your proposal for restructuring Morrison Industries. Impressive work. Elena crossed her legs, her posture conveying both professionalism and subtle provocation. I don't do impressive, Mr. Blackthorne. I do revolutionary. Morrison's bleeding money because their leadership still thinks like it's 1985. They need surgery, not a band-aid. He moved around his desk with predatory grace, every step calculated to assert dominance. His wolf approved of her boldness even as his business instincts warned him she could be trouble. And you believe you're the surgeon for the job? I know I am. She leaned forward slightly, and he caught another wave of her scent, complex, intoxicating, with an edge that made his canines ache. The question is whether you're ready to let someone else take the lead on this deal. The words hit him like a physical blow. In the supernatural world, he was Alpha Prime of the Eastern Seaboard, commanding respect from PACs across 3 states. In the corporate realm, he was equally feared and revered. No one questioned his leadership. No one dared suggest he step aside. Except this woman. You have steel, I'll give you that. He settled against the edge of his desk, close enough that her jasmine scent wrapped around him like silk. But steel without strategy is just pretty decoration. Tell me why I should trust Morrison Industries and my reputation to someone I've never worked with. Elena's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Because in the last 5 years, I've turned around 3 companies everyone said were hopeless. Because I don't play politics or kiss ass to make my point. And because right now, you're curious enough about what I might accomplish that you're willing to overlook the fact that I just implied you might not be up to the challenge. His wolf prowled beneath his skin, responding to her confidence with a mixture of arousal and the urge to establish dominance. The human side of his nature recognized a worthy adversary, possibly the first he'd encountered in years. Both sides agreed on one thing: Elena Reyes was the most dangerous woman who'd ever entered his territory. Curious is one word for it. His voice dropped to the low rumble that usually made board members sweat. With Elena, it seemed to have the opposite effect. Her pupils dilated slightly, and he caught the subtle shift in her breathing. What makes you think I won't simply acquire Morrison myself and handle the restructuring internally? Because acquisition isn't about dominance in this case, it's about transformation. Morrison needs to evolve, not be consumed. She stood with fluid grace, moving to the window wall where Manhattan spread out below them like a conquered kingdom. Besides, Mr. Blackthorne, I did my homework. You don't just collect companies. You collect challenges. She was right, though he'd never admit it aloud. Blackthorne International had grown beyond his wildest projections precisely because he sought out the impossible deals, the companies everyone else wrote off as lost causes. It fed something in his predatory nature, the thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of claiming territory others couldn't hold. And you see yourself as my next challenge? He moved to stand behind her, close enough that his breath stirred the dark silk of her hair. Her reflection in the window showed no fear, only heightened awareness that sent electric tension crackling between them. I see myself as your equal partner in this venture. She turned to face him, and suddenly they were close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The question is whether your ego can handle that. The scent of her arousal mixed with challenge hit him like a drug, and his wolf surged forward with possessive hunger.
Mine.
The thought came from somewhere deeper than conscious decision, primal and absolute. Every instinct he possessed screamed that this woman belonged to him, not as subordinate or employee, but as something far more dangerous.
His mate.
The recognition should have terrified him. Instead, it sent liquid fire through his veins, awakening needs he'd suppressed for years in service of building his empire. Elena Reyes wasn't just challenging his business acumen, she was awakening the part of himself he'd locked away in boardrooms and shareholder meetings. My ego, he said carefully, isn't the problem. The problem is that partnership requires trust, and trust requires time we might not have. Morrison's stock price drops every day we delay. Then we move fast. Elena stepped closer, close enough that her blazer brushed against his shirt. The contact sent shockwaves through his system, his wolf responding to her proximity with barely leashed desire. Give me 3 days with their books and executive team. If I can't present you with a restructuring plan that guarantees profitability within 18 months, I'll walk away and recommend you proceed with acquisition. And if you succeed? Her smile was pure seduction wrapped in business ambition. Then you get to learn what it feels like to share the apex, Mr. Blackthorne. Fair warning, I don't follow anyone's lead. The challenge in her words made his wolf bare its teeth in anticipation. She had no idea what she was asking for, what claiming partnership with him would mean. In his world, there was only one relationship between equals that mattered, the bond between alpha and mate. 3 days, he agreed, extending his hand for a shake that would seal their temporary partnership. But understand, Ms. Reyes, in my world, there are consequences for promises you can't keep. When her palm met his, the contact blazed through him like lightning. Her sharp intake of breath told him she'd felt it too, that impossible connection that defied logic and threatened everything he'd built. For a heartbeat, their hands remained joined, her pulse hammering against his heightened senses while her scent changed, deepening with the same recognition that was clawing at his chest. Elena pulled away first, professional mask sliding back into place despite the flush creeping up her throat. I always keep my promises, Mr. Blackthorne. The question is whether you can handle the results. As she walked toward the door with that same confident stride, his wolf watched her retreat with hungry eyes. She paused at the threshold, glancing back with a look that was pure feminine challenge. Oh, and Dominic? The sound of his name on her lips made his entire body clench with need. Next time we meet, you might want to work on controlling that predatory stare. It's very revealing. The door closed with a soft click, leaving him alone with the lingering trace of jasmine and the absolute certainty that his carefully ordered world had just been turned upside down. Elena Reyes had walked into his territory and claimed it as her own without firing a single shot. His wolf approved completely. But as Dominic looked out at his kingdom of glass and steel, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made the most dangerous deal of his life. In 3 days, Elena would either prove herself worthy of the partnership she demanded, or he'd be forced to destroy the first woman who'd ever made him feel truly alive. Either way, there would be no going back. Chapter 2. Elena's heels echoed through the marble lobby of Morrison Industries at precisely 6 a.m., her laptop bag slung over one shoulder and determination radiating from every line of her body. The building's Art Deco grandeur spoke of better days, when the family-owned manufacturing empire had been a force to be reckoned with rather than a cautionary tale about outdated leadership. She'd spent the previous evening dissecting every financial report, market analysis, and internal memo she could legally access. What she'd found was worse than she'd expected, and exactly what she'd hoped for. Morrison Industries wasn't just struggling, it was actively sabotaging itself with bureaucratic incompetence and a board of directors more interested in protecting their positions than generating profit. Perfect prey for a predator like her. The elevator climbed to the executive floor in silence, giving Elena time to review her strategy. 3 days to prove herself to Dominic Blackthorne. 3 days to show the most dangerous man she'd ever met that she could match his ambition with her own. The memory of their handshake still sent electric currents up her arm, that impossible moment when his touch had felt like coming home and walking into fire simultaneously. Focus. She couldn't afford to be distracted by whatever game Blackthorne was playing. The way he'd looked at her, like he wanted to devour her whole, suggested he was used to mixing business with pleasure. She wasn't about to become another notch on a billionaire's bedpost, no matter how magnificently he filled out that Italian suit. The Morrison boardroom was a shrine to corporate stagnation, complete with portraits of deceased executives and furniture that probably predated the Clinton administration. Elena set up her laptop at the head of the conference table, claiming the power position before the executives arrived. If they wanted to challenge her authority, they'd have to do it while looking up at her. At exactly 7 a.m., 5 men in varying stages of middle-aged complacency shuffled into the room. Elena had memorized their names and histories. James Morrison III, the ineffectual CEO whose grandfather had built the company; Robert Chen, the CFO who'd been cooking books to hide losses; Thomas Garrett, the head of operations who hadn't implemented a single innovative process in 15 years; David Walsh, the marketing director whose idea of digital strategy was still Facebook ads; and Michael Torres, the legal counsel who specialized in creating more problems than he solved. Gentlemen. Elena didn't rise from her seat, a subtle power play that made several of them frown. I'm Elena Reyes, and I'm here on behalf of Blackthorne International to conduct a comprehensive operational analysis. For the next 3 days, you'll provide me with complete access to all departmental data, personnel files, and financial records. James Morrison's face flushed red above his expensive tie. Now wait just a minute. This is still a Morrison family company, and I won't have some consultant. Some consultant, Elena interrupted smoothly, who's about to determine whether you keep your jobs or get replaced by competent leadership. Mr. Blackthorne doesn't pay me to play nice, gentlemen. He pays me to fix problems. The question is whether you're part of the solution or part of the cleanup. The room went dead silent. Elena could practically smell the fear sweat starting to collect under their overpriced suits. Good. Fear was a motivator, and these men had been comfortable for far too long. What exactly do you need from us? Robert Chen asked, his voice careful and measured. Elena smiled with razor-sharp precision. Everything. Financial projections, supply chain analyses, employee satisfaction surveys, market research data, and complete transparency about where this company has been hemorrhaging money. I want to see 5 years of board meeting minutes, executive compensation packages, and every contract worth more than $50,000. That's proprietary information, Thomas Garrett sputtered. We can't just hand over. You can and you will. Elena's voice carried the kind of authority she'd learned from watching apex predators in action, including one particular billionaire alpha who'd made corporate conquest an art form. Because in approximately 4 hours, Mr. Blackthorne will arrive for our progress meeting. If I don't have what I need to present him with preliminary findings, he'll assume you're being obstructive. And trust me, you don't want to find out how he handles obstruction. The mention of Dominic's name had the desired effect. His reputation for ruthless business practices was legendary, and the look of genuine terror that crossed their faces told Elena they'd heard the stories. What they didn't know was that she suspected those stories barely scratched the surface of what Dominic Blackthorne was capable of. "We'll get you what you need," James Morrison said quickly. "Full cooperation." "Excellent." Elena opened her laptop and pulled up a detailed timeline. "Mr. Chun, I need those financial reports within the hour. Mr. Garrett, I want your complete operational workflow documentation. Mr. Walsh, bring me everything you've got on market positioning and competitor analysis. Mr. Torres, I need legal assessments on all pending litigation and regulatory compliance issues. Mr. Morrison, you're going to walk me through every major decision made in the past 2 years, including the ones that didn't work out." As the executives scattered to gather the requested information, Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. This was what she lived for, the moment when she could see all the pieces of a broken system and know exactly how to rebuild it stronger. Morrison Industries was a mess, but it was a mess with potential. In the right hands, it could become a significant player in its market again. The question was whether Dominic would recognize that potential or simply see an acquisition target. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Progress report at 11 a.m. Don't disappoint me. D." Elena stared at the message, noting the authoritative tone that managed to be both professional and somehow intimate. Everything about Dominic Blackthorne suggested a man accustomed to being obeyed without question, from the way he'd positioned himself during their meeting to the casual assumption that she'd be available whenever he decided to check in. She typed back, "I don't disappoint. Be prepared to be impressed." His response came immediately, "I'm looking forward to it." The simple words sent heat curling through her stomach, and Elena cursed under her breath. She was supposed to be focused on the biggest opportunity of her career, not fantasizing about what it would feel like to have Dominic Blackthorne's full attention focused on her instead of business metrics. When the executives returned with their arms full of files and flash drives, Elena threw herself into the analysis with single-minded determination. Numbers told stories, and the story Morrison Industries was telling was one of systematic mismanagement, missed opportunities, and leadership that had confused maintaining the status quo with actual strategy. But underneath the dysfunction, she could see the bones of something powerful. Morrison had manufacturing capabilities that their competitors would kill for, supply chain relationships that had been built over decades, and a workforce that was skilled but demoralized by poor leadership. With the right restructuring and injection of modern business practices, the company could easily triple its market value within 2 years. By 10:45 a.m., Elena had compiled enough data to support her preliminary assessment. Morrison Industries wasn't dying, it was dormant. All it needed was someone with the vision to wake it up and the ruthlessness to cut away the dead weight. At exactly 11 a.m., the boardroom door opened and Dominic Blackthorne walked in like he owned the building, which Elena reflected he very well might by the end of the week. Today's suit was charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, tailored to emphasize the broad shoulders and lean waist that suggested he maintained his physical condition with the same discipline he brought to business. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, pale green with flecks of gold, assessing everything in the room with predatory intensity, including her, Ms. Reyes. His voice carried that same low authority that had made her pulse race yesterday. "I trust you've found Morrison's operations illuminating." Illuminating is one word for it. Elena stood and moved to the whiteboard where she'd mapped out her preliminary findings. "James, gentlemen, if you take your seats, I'll present my initial assessment to Mr. Blackthorne." The Morrison executives filed in like condemned men, their earlier cooperation clearly motivated by fear rather than enthusiasm. Elena didn't care about their feelings. She cared about results. "Morrison Industries," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room, "is a perfect case study in how good bones can be destroyed by bad leadership. Mr. Blackthorne, they have infrastructure worth approximately $200 million, supply chain relationships that would take competitors decades to replicate, and manufacturing capacity that's currently running at only 60% utilization." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his attention fixed on her with laser focus. "And the problems?" "Leadership that mistakes maintaining the status quo for strategy. A marketing department that thinks digital transformation means having a Facebook page. Financial management that's more concerned with hiding losses than preventing them. And a complete failure to innovate in a market that's evolved significantly in the past 5 years. James Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Now, Ms. Reyes, I think you're being somewhat harsh. I'm being accurate. Elena cut him off. Your company has lost 30% of its market share in the past 3 years because you've been competing in 2020 with 1995 strategies. Your biggest competitor just secured the Patterson Industries contract that should have been yours because they offered integrated digital logistics tracking and you couldn't even explain what that meant. She turned to the whiteboard and began outlining her restructuring plan with swift, confident strokes. Here's what we're going to do. Complete leadership overhaul in marketing, operations, and strategic planning. Implementation of modern digital infrastructure, including customer relationship management systems, supply chain optimization software, and predictive analytics for inventory management. Aggressive expansion into 3 markets you've been ignoring because you were afraid of the initial investment. The cost, Robertson began, will be recovered within 18 months through increased efficiency and market share recapture. Elena pulled up a financial projection on her laptop and connected it to the room's display system. Conservative estimates show 15% profit increase in year 1, 30% in year 2. Aggressive but achievable projections put us at 50% profit growth by year 3. The room went silent as the executives stared at the numbers. Elena could see the wheels turning in their heads, fear warring with greed as they realized her plan might actually work. But it was Dominic's reaction she cared about. He studied her projections with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey, those unusual eyes missing nothing as they tracked across her carefully constructed arguments. Impressive work, he said finally. But implementation requires more than good PowerPoint slides. How do we ensure execution? Elena smiled, knowing she'd just passed the first test. By bringing in people who know how to execute. I have contacts in every division we need to upgrade, people I've worked with before, who can hit the ground running. We don't have time to train the current team up to modern standards, so we replace them with people who are already there. Including upper management? Dominic's question was casual, but Elena caught the subtle threat beneath it. Especially upper management. She didn't look at the Morrison executives as she delivered their death sentence. Mr. Morrison can remain as a figurehead CEO if that's important for family legacy reasons, but day-to-day operations need to be handled by people who understand 21st century business practices. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena had just proposed gutting the executive team while their own CEO sat at the table, and she'd done it with the kind of cold efficiency that would have made a corporate raider proud. Dominic's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. And you see yourself heading this restructuring effort? I see myself as the only person in this room qualified to make it work. Elena met his gaze directly, letting him see the absolute confidence behind her words. This isn't a job for consultants or committee decisions, Mr. Blackthorne. This is surgery, and it requires someone willing to make the hard cuts. Agreed. Dominic stood with fluid grace, his movement commanding attention from everyone in the room. Gentlemen, thank you for your cooperation today. Ms. Reyes and I need to discuss implementation details. Privately. The dismissal was absolute, and the Morrison executives filed out like defeated soldiers. Elena waited until the door closed behind them before allowing herself a moment of triumph. She'd just dismantled a company's entire leadership structure and convinced them to cooperate in their own destruction. Ruthless, Dominic observed, moving closer to where she stood by the whiteboard. I approve. Necessary, Elena corrected. Ruthless implies cruelty for its own sake. This is about results. Is it? He was close enough now that she could catch his scent, something expensive and masculine with an undertone she couldn't identify, but that made her pulse quicken. Or, do you enjoy the power of tearing apart what other people built? The question should have offended her. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through her chest as she recognized the challenge behind it. Dominic Blackthorne wasn't just testing her business acumen. He was probing deeper, trying to understand what drove her. I enjoy building something better from the pieces, she said carefully. Destruction without purpose is waste. Destruction as part of creation? That's evolution. His smile was pure predator appreciation. Spoken like someone who understands the nature of power. Power is a tool, Elena replied. What matters is how you use it. And how do you use it, Elena? The way he said her name made it sound like a caress, intimate and possessive in a way that sent shivers down her spine. She turned to face him fully, recognizing that they'd moved beyond business into something far more dangerous. I use it to get what I want. Always. And what do you want? The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Elena could feel the tension crackling in the air, electric and dangerous. Everything about this man suggested he was used to taking what he wanted, when he wanted it. The way he was looking at her, like she was something he intended to possess, should have set off every warning bell in her head. Instead, it made her want to step closer. Right now. She allowed a hint of challenge to creep into her voice. I want to know if you're going to approve my restructuring plan, or if this was all an elaborate waste of time. Dominic's laugh was low and rich, filled with genuine amusement.
Direct.
I like that. He moved to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. Your plan is solid, your projections are realistic, and your assessment of Morrison's leadership is spot on. The question isn't whether I approve, it's whether you're prepared for the consequences of success. Meaning that if I greenlight this project, you'll be working directly with me for the next 18 months. Daily meetings, strategic planning sessions, progress reviews. You'll have access to resources most consultants only dream of, but you'll also be accountable to standards that have broken lesser people. Elena felt her pulse quicken, though whether from excitement or apprehension, she couldn't say. I don't break, Mr. Blackthorne. We'll see. He turned back to her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Because I have a feeling that working with you is going to test limits I didn't know I had. The admission was unexpected, a crack in the armor of absolute confidence he wore like a second skin. It made Elena realize that whatever was happening between them was affecting him as strongly as it was her. Is that a problem? She asked. Dominic's smile was pure masculine challenge. Ms. Reyes, I built an empire by turning problems into opportunities. If you think you can be my first exception to that rule, you're welcome to try. As he walked toward the door, Elena felt the strange certainty that she'd just agreed to much more than a business partnership. Whatever game they were playing, the stakes were higher than corporate restructuring and profit margins. Much higher. Elena, Dominic paused at the threshold, not turning around. We start tomorrow. 8 a.m., my office. Don't be late. Alone in the boardroom, Elena sank into her chair and tried to process what had just happened. She'd secured the biggest contract of her career, proven herself to one of the most powerful men in corporate America, and somehow managed to turn a business meeting into something that felt like foreplay. Her phone buzzed with another text, dinner tonight. I'll send a car. We have details to discuss. Elena stared at the message, recognizing an order disguised as an invitation. Everything about Dominic Blackthorne suggested a man who was used to being obeyed without question, from his casually authoritative texts to the way he'd simply announce their dinner plans without asking if she was available. She should say no. Should establish professional boundaries before whatever attraction was sparking between them complicated their business relationship. Instead, she typed back, what time? 7. Where something that makes a statement. Elena smiled despite herself. If Dominic Blackthorne wanted to see what kind of statement she could make, he was about to get an education in just how dangerous she could be when she decided to stop holding back.
Game on.
Chapter 3. The black town car that arrived at Elena's apartment building at precisely 7 o'clock was the kind of vehicle that screamed wealth without vulgarity, understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted. As the driver held the door open, Elena caught a glimpse of hand-stitched leather interior and the subtle gleam of champagne chilling in a built-in cooler. She'd chosen her outfit with military precision, a midnight blue cocktail dress that skimmed her curves without revealing too much, paired with heels that added 3 inches to her height and made her legs look like they went on forever. The statement Dominic had requested was clear. She was nobody's trophy, but she knew how to play the game. The restaurant he'd chosen was 11 Madison Park, the kind of establishment where reservations were booked months in advance and the waiting list read like a who's who of New York's elite. Elena wasn't surprised when they were immediately escorted to a private dining room on the top floor, the city lights spread out below them like a conquered kingdom. Dominic was already waiting, and the sight of him in a perfectly tailored black suit made her pulse skip in ways that had nothing to do with professional admiration. He looked like sin personified, all sharp angles and dangerous masculinity, with an edge that suggested civilized behavior was a choice he could revoke at any moment. Elena. He stood as she entered, his eyes tracking over her dress with predatory appreciation. Beautiful. The single word, delivered in that low rumble, made heat curl through her stomach. Thank you. Though I have to admit, this seems elaborate for a business dinner. His smile was pure masculine challenge. Who said anything about business? Before she could respond, he was pulling out her chair with old-world courtesy that somehow managed to feel possessive rather than polite. As she settled into her seat, his hand brushed against her shoulder, a fleeting contact that sent electricity racing across her skin. The Morrison restructuring, Elena said, determined to maintain some semblance of professional distance. We should discuss implementation timelines and we should discuss why you're trying so hard to pretend this is about Morrison Industries, Dominic interrupted, settling into the chair across from her. When we both know that's not why you're here. The directness of his statement hit her like a physical blow. Elena prided herself on control, on her ability to compartmentalize attraction and ambition, but something about this man shredded her defenses like they were made of tissue paper. I'm here because you demanded my presence, she said carefully. If that wasn't about business. It wasn't. His eyes locked onto hers, pale green with gold flecks that seemed to glow in the candlelight. It was about this thing between us that's been burning since the moment you walked into my office. The question is whether you're brave enough to admit it. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She'd spent years building walls around herself, protecting her ambitions from the weakness of emotional entanglements. But Dominic Blackthorne looked at her like he could see straight through every defense she'd ever constructed. I don't mix business with personal relationships, she said, the words sounding weak even to her own ears. Good, Dominic replied, leaning back in his chair with predatory satisfaction. Because what I want from you isn't a relationship. It's surrender. The word hit her like lightning, awakening needs she'd spent years suppressing. There was something about the way he said it, not as a demand, but as an inevitability, that made her entire body clench with desire. Surrender isn't in my vocabulary, Elena managed, though her voice came out huskier than intended. It will be. The absolute confidence in his tone should have infuriated her. Instead, it sent liquid fire coursing through her veins. You're strong, Elena. Stronger than anyone I've met in years. But strength without submission is incomplete. It's like a blade without a sheath, dangerous to everyone, including the one who wields it. And you see yourself as my sheath? The question came out as a challenge, though she wasn't sure which one of them she was challenging. Dominic's smile was pure predator satisfaction. I see myself as the only man strong enough to match you. The only one who won't break under the weight of your ambition or be intimidated by your power. As if to demonstrate his point, he reached across the table and traced one finger along the back of her hand. The contact was light, almost casual, but it sent shockwaves through her entire nervous system. Elena felt her carefully maintained control slip another notch. This is insane, she whispered. We barely know each other. I know you demolish Morrison's executive team without blinking. I know you walk into rooms like you own them and make men twice your age stumble over themselves to please you. I know you want success more than you want safety, and you'd rather fight for what you believe in than compromise for an easy win. Each observation hit closer to home than the last. Elena stared at him in fascination and growing alarm, wondering how he'd read her so accurately in such a short time. And what do you want from me? She asked. Everything. The single word was delivered with such quiet intensity that it stole her breath. Your intelligence, your strength, your ambition, your fire and your submission. All of it. The waiter appeared with their first course, but Elena barely noticed the artfully arranged plates. Her entire focus was locked on the man across from her, this dangerous creature who somehow made total possession sound like the ultimate gift. "I don't submit to anyone," she said when they were alone again. "You've never met anyone worth submitting to," Dominic corrected. "But I'm not just anyone, Elena. I'm the alpha you've been searching for without realizing it." The word alpha sent a strange chill down her spine, though she couldn't explain why. Something about the way he said it suggested layers of meaning she didn't understand, connections she couldn't quite grasp. "I'm not searching for anything," Elena protested, though the words felt hollow. "Aren't you?" Dominic's voice dropped to that low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "Then why are you here? Why didn't you walk away the moment I made my intentions clear?" "Because I can't," Elena thought but didn't say. "Because something about you calls to parts of myself I didn't know existed." "Curiosity," she said instead. "Liar." But his tone held amusement rather than accusation. "You're here because you recognize what I am, even if you don't understand it yet. You're here because for the first time in your life, you've met someone who might actually be able to handle all that fire burning inside you." Elena took a sip of wine, using the moment to gather her composure. Everything about this conversation felt like walking through a minefield, each word potentially explosive. But she couldn't deny the truth in what he was saying. She was here because something about Dominic Blackthorne called to her in ways she'd never experienced. "And if you're wrong," she challenged, "if I'm not looking for someone to handle my fire, then you'll walk away after dessert and never look back." His smile was sharp enough to cut. "But you won't. Because deep down you know I'm right. You know you need someone strong enough to match you, dominant enough to challenge you, and confident enough to take control when you need to let go." The accuracy of his assessment was terrifying. Elena had built her entire identity around independence and control, but something about Dominic made her want to test the limits of both. "You're very sure of yourself," she observed. "I'm sure of us." He leaned forward, close enough that she could catch his scent, something masculine and wild that made her pulse quicken. "Tell me something, Elena. When you're making those brilliant strategic decisions that tear apart companies and rebuild them stronger, what drives you? What is it you're really hunting?" The question caught her off guard with its insight. "I want to build something that lasts. Something that can't be torn down by incompetence or fear or small thinking." "Power," Dominic said simply. "You want power. Not the kind that comes from position or title, but real power. The ability to shape the world according to your vision." "And what's wrong with that?" "Nothing. It's why we're perfect for each other." His smile was pure predator satisfaction. "Because I don't want to diminish your power, Elena. I want to amplify it. I want to give you resources and opportunities that will let you build empires instead of just fixing broken companies." The offer was intoxicating, and Elena found herself leaning forward despite every warning bell in her head. "In exchange for what?" "Your complete trust. Your absolute honesty. And your willingness to let me be the only person in the world who sees past all that armor you wear." The vulnerability he was demanding should have sent her running. Instead, it made her ache with longing for something she hadn't even known she wanted. "I don't do vulnerable," Elena whispered. "You will with me." The quiet certainty in his voice made her shiver. "Because I'm the only person strong enough to protect what you give me." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. Dominic glanced at the screen and his expression shifted, becoming sharp and predatory in a way that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Problem?" Elena asked. "Someone's trying to interfere with the Morrison deal." His voice carried an edge that hadn't been there moments before. Marcus Webb from Titan Industries has been calling Morrison's board members, suggesting they explore other options. Elena felt her own predatory instinct sharpen. Marcus Webb is a bottom feeder who specializes in vulture capitalism. If he's sniffing around Morrison, it means he thinks he can acquire them for cheap and strip them for parts. "Over my dead body." The words came out as a growl, and Elena caught something in his expression that looked almost inhuman. No one interferes with what's mine. The possessive declaration sent heat spiraling through her chest. She should have been offended by his assumption of ownership, but instead she found herself thinking that it might be nice to belong to someone strong enough to fight for her. "What do you want to do about it?" she asked. Dominic's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "We're going to remind Mr. Webb why it's dangerous to hunt in another predator's territory. How do you feel about making a few strategic calls tomorrow morning?" "I feel like Marcus Webb is about to learn what happens when he underestimates the competition." Elena's own smile matched his for dangerous intent. "What did you have in mind?" "We're going to systematically destroy every argument he could make to Morrison's board. By the time we're finished, they'll see him as exactly what he is, a scavenger trying to profit from their desperation." The collaborative planning session that followed was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. Working with Dominic was like dancing with a partner who anticipated her every move, who could build on her ideas and improve them in ways that made the final result stronger than either could have achieved alone. By the time dessert arrived, they'd crafted a comprehensive strategy for neutralizing Marcus Webb's interference. But more importantly, Elena had gotten a glimpse of what true partnership could look like. Two predators hunting together instead of competing for territory. "You're magnificent when you're plotting corporate destruction," Dominic observed as their waiter cleared the plates. "Flattery, Mr. Blackthorne?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "How pedestrian." "Truth, Ms. Reyes. There's nothing pedestrian about you." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She'd expected games and manipulation, the usual power plays that characterized interactions between ambitious people. Instead, Dominic seemed genuinely fascinated by her mind, turned on by her competence in ways that had nothing to do with typical male ego. "I should go," Elena said, though she made no move to stand. "Early morning tomorrow, if we're going to war with Marcus Webb." "You should," Dominic agreed. "But you won't. Not yet." He was right, and they both knew it. The evening had shifted something fundamental between them, broken down walls that Elena hadn't even realized she'd built. For the first time in years, she felt seen not just as a brilliant strategist or a beautiful woman, but as all the complex, contradictory pieces that made up who she really was. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we see if you're brave enough to trust me with more than just business." Dominic stood and moved around the table, extending his hand to help her up. "Walk with me." Elena let him pull her to her feet, hyper-aware of the strength in his grip and the way his thumb traced across her knuckles before releasing her. They moved through the restaurant like royalty, other diners turning to watch their passage with the kind of attention reserved for predators. The elevator ride to the building's rooftop was silent, but charged with electricity. Elena could feel Dominic's presence like heat against her skin, could smell that wild scent that seemed to grow stronger when they were alone together. The rooftop garden was a private oasis above the city, strings of lights creating intimate pools of warmth in the darkness. Manhattan sprawled beneath them like a constellation of possibilities, the noise and chaos reduced to a distant hum. "Beautiful," Elena breathed, moving to the railing to take in the view. "Yes," Dominic said from directly behind her. "You are." Elena turned to find him closer than she'd expected, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. In the soft light, he looked almost otherworldly, beautiful and dangerous in ways that made her pulse race. "Dominic," she began, but whatever protest she'd planned died when he reached up to cup her face in his hands. "I'm going to kiss you now," he said quietly. "If you don't want that, tell me to stop." Elena stared up at him, knowing that this was the moment of no return. Once she crossed this line, there would be no going back to professional distance and carefully maintained boundaries. "I don't want you to stop," she whispered. His kiss was everything she'd expected and nothing she'd prepared for, controlled and wild, possessive and reverent. He kissed her like he was claiming territory, like he was making promises with his mouth that she'd never heard spoken aloud. When they finally broke apart, Elena was breathing hard and clinging to his jacket for balance. The careful composure she'd maintained all evening had been completely shredded by 30 seconds of contact. "Jesus," she gasped. "Just Dominic will do," he said with dark amusement. Though, I appreciate the religious sentiment. Elena laughed despite herself, surprised by how easy it was to fall into this intimate banter with him. You're impossible. I'm inevitable. His thumb traced along her lower lip, and she had to resist the urge to capture it with her teeth. This thing between us, it's not going away, Elena. We can fight it, or we can see where it leads. And if it leads somewhere dangerous? Dominic's smile was pure predator satisfaction. Sweetheart, I am dangerous. The question is whether you're brave enough to handle that. Standing there in his arms with the city spread out below them, Elena felt like she was balanced on the edge of a cliff. Everything rational told her to step back, to maintain professional boundaries, and protect the career she'd worked so hard to build. But rational had never gotten her heart racing like this. Rational had never made her feel like she could conquer the world if she just had the right partner beside her. I can handle anything you've got, Elena said, meeting his challenge with one of her own. We'll see about that. Dominic leaned down to brush his lips against her ear, his breath sending shivers down her spine. Because I plan to test every limit you think you have. As he stepped back to escort her to the elevator, Elena realized she was no longer just playing a game. Whatever was happening between them had moved beyond strategy into something far more dangerous and infinitely more compelling. She was falling for Dominic Blackthorne, and the landing was going to change everything. Chapter 4. Elena arrived at Blackthorne Tower at 7:30 a.m., 30 minutes early and armed with enough caffeine to power a small city. She'd spent the night alternating between reviewing Marcus Webb's corporate history and replaying every moment of Dominic's kiss on the rooftop. Both activities had left her restless and hyper-aware, her body still humming with the memory of his hands on her face. The executive floor buzzed with controlled urgency, assistants moving with purpose, while phones rang in carefully modulated tones. Elena had barely reached Dominic's office when his assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah who looked like she could run a small country, intercepted her. Ms. Reyes, Mr. Blackthorne is in conference room A with the legal team. He asked that you join them immediately. The conference room was a testament to modern corporate power, all glass and steel with a view of the harbor that probably cost more than most people's homes. Dominic stood at the head of a table surrounded by 6 lawyers, his presence commanding even in the midst of legal strategy. He looked up as Elena entered, and the heat in his eyes reminded her exactly why she'd barely slept. Elena. Perfect timing. He gestured to the empty chair at his right hand, the position reserved for his most trusted advisor. We've got a problem. As she settled into her seat, Elena noted the tension in the room. These weren't just any lawyers. They were the kind of legal predators who specialized in corporate warfare, and they all looked like they were gearing up for battle. Marcus Webb moved faster than we anticipated. Dominic continued, sliding a tablet across the table to her. He's not just making overtures to Morrison's board. He's filed preliminary acquisition paperwork with the SEC. Elena scanned the documents, her analytical mind immediately cataloging the implications. He's trying to force a quick sale before we can implement the restructuring plan. If Morrison's board panics and accepts his offer, we lose everything, Dominic finished. 3 months of analysis, your brilliant restructuring strategy, and the most profitable deal I've pursued in years. One of the lawyers, a silver-haired man named Harrison, leaned forward. We could challenge the filing on technical grounds, but Webb's team knows what they're doing. Any delays we create will be temporary at best. Then we don't delay, Elena said, her mind already racing through alternatives. We accelerate. What would it take to fast-track our own acquisition offer? 48 hours minimum, another lawyer replied. That's assuming Morrison's board agrees to an emergency meeting and we can get regulatory approval expedited. Dominic's smile was sharp enough to cut. Then that's what we do. Sarah. His assistant appeared in the doorway so quickly Elena suspected she'd been waiting for the summons. I need James Morrison on the phone in 15 minutes, and I want an emergency board meeting scheduled for this afternoon. As the legal team scattered to execute various aspects of the accelerated timeline, Dominic turned his full attention to Elena. The intensity of his focus made her pulse quicken despite the professional setting. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "We'll need to present a complete restructuring plan and acquisition offer today, not next week. Are you ready for that?" Elena felt the familiar thrill of a challenge accepted. "I've been ready since yesterday. The question is whether Morrison's board will recognize the difference between a strategic partnership and a corporate raid. They will when we're finished with them." Dominic stood and moved to the window, his predatory grace evident even in the simple action. "But first, we need to deal with Marcus Webb directly." "Meaning?" His reflection in the glass showed a smile that was pure predator anticipation. "Meaning we're going to remind him why it's dangerous to hunt in another alpha's territory." The word alpha sent that same strange chill down Elena's spine, but before she could analyze the feeling, Dominic was turning back to her with business-like efficiency. "I need you to call Thomas Richardson at Sterling Financial. Tell him I want a complete background check on Webb's financing for this acquisition, funding sources, investor commitments, everything. If there are any weaknesses in his position, I want them found." Elena was already reaching for her phone. "What about Morrison's board? They'll need to understand exactly what Webb is offering versus what we can provide." "Leave that to me." Dominic's tone carried the kind of authority that suggested outcomes were never in doubt when he set his mind to something. "Focus on finding Webb's vulnerabilities. If we can't beat him on timeline, we'll destroy him on substance." The next 6 hours were a masterclass in corporate warfare. Elena coordinated with financial analysts while Dominic worked his network of contacts, and together they built a case against Marcus Webb's acquisition that was both comprehensive and devastating. By noon, they discovered that Webb's funding was shakier than it appeared, dependent on investors who had a history of backing out at the first sign of competition. His business plan for Morrison Industries involved massive layoffs and asset liquidation, exactly the kind of vulture capitalism that would destroy the company's long-term value. In contrast, their own proposal offered job security, growth potential, and a restructuring plan that would make Morrison stronger rather than simply more profitable in the short term. "The board meeting is set for 3 o'clock, Dominic announced as they reviewed their presentation one final time. James Morrison sounded nervous, which means Webb's already been applying pressure. Elena nodded, her attention focused on the financial projections displayed on the conference room screens. "Our numbers are solid, but numbers aren't everything. Morrison's board will respond to fear more than opportunity. Then we give them something to fear." Dominic's smile was cold enough to freeze blood. "We make it clear that rejecting our offer in favor of Webb's means they'll be responsible for destroying a century-old family legacy." At 2:30, they arrived at Morrison Industries in Dominic's private car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Elena had changed into her most authoritative suit, charcoal gray, with a subtle pattern that suggested both professionalism and predatory competence. "Ready?" Dominic asked as they stood outside the boardroom. Elena could hear voices through the thick wood, tense conversation that suggested the board members were already divided. "Born ready." The boardroom fell silent as they entered. 8 faces turned toward them with expressions ranging from hopeful to terrified, and Elena immediately cataloged the political dynamics at play. James Morrison looked haggard, clearly feeling the weight of decisions that would determine his family company's fate. Robert Chun appeared calculating, already working the angles. The other board members showed various degrees of anxiety and confusion. "Gentlemen," Dominic said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Thank you for agreeing to this emergency meeting. I know Marcus Webb has made you an offer that seems attractive in its simplicity. Ms. Reyes and I are here to show you why simple solutions to complex problems usually create bigger problems." Elena moved to the presentation screen and pulled up their first slide, a side-by-side comparison of Webb's offer versus their restructuring proposal. "Mr. Webb is offering you $42 per share in cash, with a promise to close within 60 days. It sounds good until you understand what happens next." She clicked to the next slide, which outlined Webb's post-acquisition strategy in stark detail. Immediate layoffs of 60% of your workforce. Liquidation of manufacturing assets that don't show profit within the first quarter. Termination of all research and development projects. Essentially, Mr. Webb wants to buy Morrison Industries, so he can sell it for parts. But the price, one board member began, is designed to look attractive while hiding the real cost, Dominic interrupted smoothly. Marcus Webb specializes in acquiring distressed companies, stripping them of anything valuable, and leaving empty shells behind. His offer represents the company's liquidation value, not its potential value. Elena advanced to their restructuring projections, and the difference was striking. Where Webb's plan showed immediate cash but long-term destruction, their approach demonstrated sustainable growth and increased market value. Our proposal maintains current employment levels while adding positions in high-growth areas, Elena explained. We're not just preserving Morrison Industries, we're positioning it to dominate its market for the next decade. James Morrison leaned forward, hope flickering in his tired eyes. The numbers look impressive, but implementation requires significant upfront investment. How do we know Blackthorn International will follow through? Dominic's smile was pure confidence. Because unlike Mr. Webb, I don't make money by destroying companies. I make money by building them into market leaders. Morrison Industries represents a strategic acquisition that fits perfectly with my existing portfolio. I have every incentive to make it successful. For the next hour, Elena and Dominic systematically dismantled every argument Webb could have made while building an unassailable case for their own approach. They answered questions, addressed concerns, and painted a vision of Morrison Industries that was both ambitious and achievable. By the time they finished, the board members looked like different people. Instead of desperate sellers facing inevitable decline, they saw themselves as partners in a transformation that would restore their company's former glory. We need to discuss this privately, James Morrison said finally. How long do we have to make a decision? Mr. Webb's offer expires at midnight, Dominic replied. Ours expires when his does. Choose carefully, gentlemen. This decision will determine whether Morrison Industries survives or becomes another cautionary tale about what happens when fear overrides vision. Outside the boardroom, Elena felt the adrenaline crash that always followed high-stakes presentations. They'd done everything possible to win Morrison's board over, but corporate decisions often came down to factors beyond logic and superior strategy. How do you think they'll vote? She asked as they waited in a small conference room down the hall. Dominic was staring out the window at the Manhattan skyline, his expression unreadable. They'll choose us. Fear is a powerful motivator, but greed is stronger. We've shown them how to have both security and growth. And if they don't, his smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Then Marcus Webb learns what happens when someone takes something that belongs to me. The possessive declaration sent heat spiraling through Elena's chest. She was beginning to understand that Dominic Blackthorn didn't just want to win. He needed to claim and hold territory with a kind of primal intensity that defied rational explanation. Is that what this is about? She asked quietly. Possession? Dominic turned from the window, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Everything worthwhile is about possession, Elena. The question is whether you have the strength to hold on to what you claim. Before she could respond, James Morrison appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Blackthorn, Ms. Reyes, the board has reached a decision. They followed him back to the boardroom, where 8 faces waited with a kind of tension that preceded life-changing announcements. Elena felt her pulse quicken, everything depending on the next few words. By a vote of 6-2, James Morrison announced, the board accepts Blackthorn International's restructuring proposal. Welcome to Morrison Industries, Mr. Blackthorn. The relief that flooded through Elena was quickly replaced by triumph. They'd done it, outmaneuvered Marcus Webb and secured the acquisition that would establish her as one of the premier corporate strategists in the country. But as she shook hands with the board members and accepted their congratulations, Elena was intensely aware of Dominic's presence beside her. His victory was absolute, his satisfaction evident in every line of his body. He'd won Morrison Industries, but something in his expression suggested he'd claimed something even more valuable, something that had everything to do with her. As they left Morrison Industries 2 hours later, Elena felt like she was walking into a new phase of her life. The professional triumph was everything she'd worked toward, but the personal implications were far more complex. Dinner. Dominic said as they settled into his car. "We need to celebrate." "Another command disguised as an invitation?" Elena asked, though her tone held amusement rather than irritation. A request from a man who just watched his partner execute the most impressive corporate strategy he's seen in years. Dominic's smile was warm with genuine admiration. "You were magnificent in there, Elena. Absolutely magnificent." The praise sent warmth flooding through her chest. She'd heard compliments throughout her career, but something about earning Dominic's approval felt different, more significant, more personal. "We were magnificent," she corrected. "That was teamwork, not a solo performance." "Yes," Dominic agreed quietly. "It was." But the way he said it suggested they were no longer talking about business presentations and boardroom victories. As the car moved through Manhattan traffic toward whatever exclusive restaurant Dominic had chosen for their celebration, Elena realized that winning Morrison Industries had been the easy part. The real challenge was figuring out what came next, professionally and personally, now that she and Dominic Blackthorne had proven they were unstoppable together. Chapter 5. The private dining room at Daniel was even more exclusive than the previous night's venue, an intimate space where candlelight caught the gleam of crystal and silver while Manhattan glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena had barely settled into her chair when Dom appeared with a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Cristal 2008, Dominic announced, pouring the golden liquid into flutes that caught the light like captured starlight. "To celebrate the most impressive corporate conquest I've witnessed in a decade." Elena accepted her glass, noting how his fingers lingered against hers during the transfer. The contact sent familiar electricity racing up her arm, and she was beginning to understand that everything with Dominic carried undertones of seduction. "To partnerships that exceed expectations," she countered, raising her glass. Their eyes locked over the rim of their flutes, and Elena felt that same dangerous awareness that had been building since their first meeting. Tonight felt different, charged with victory and possibility in ways that made her pulse quicken with anticipation rather than nerves. "You realize what we accomplished today changes everything," Dominic said as they settled into the intimate ritual of an expensive dinner. "Morrison Industries isn't just an acquisition, it's the foundation for something much larger." Elena leaned forward, intrigued. "Larger how?" "I've been planning a move into manufacturing for years, but I needed the right entry point. Morrison gives us that, plus the infrastructure to expand into 3 adjacent markets." His eyes gleamed with the kind of predatory satisfaction she was beginning to recognize. "Within 5 years, we could control 20% of the industrial supply chain on the East Coast." The scope of his ambition was breathtaking. Elena had thought she understood the stakes of the Morrison deal, but Dominic was playing a game several moves ahead of everyone else, including her. "And where do I fit into this larger plan?" she asked. "Everywhere." The single word was delivered with quiet intensity. "You're not just a consultant anymore, Elena. You're my strategic partner, my equal in building an empire that will last decades." The offer was everything she'd ever wanted professionally, but something in his tone suggested layers of meaning beyond corporate structure. "Equal partners have equal say in major decisions." "Agreed." Dominic's smile was sharp with challenge. "Though, I think you'll find that our instincts align more often than not. We think alike, you and I. We understand power." As if to demonstrate his point, their first course arrived, an artful arrangement that showcased the chef's technique while maintaining elegant simplicity. Elena noted how Dominic's attention never wavered from her, how he seemed to anticipate her responses before she voiced them. "Tell me something," she said, cutting into the perfectly prepared quail. "What drives you? Really drives you, beyond money and market share?" Dominic considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Control," he said finally. "I want to shape the world according to my vision rather than react to what others have built. Too many people accept the status quo as inevitable. I prefer to make it obsolete. And if your vision conflicts with what others want." His smile was pure predator anticipation. "Then they adapt or get left behind. Darwin's law applies to business as much as biology." The casual ruthlessness should have concerned her, but Elena found herself admiring his clarity of purpose. She'd spent years working with executives who second-guessed every decision, who let fear and committee thinking water down their strategies. Dominic's absolute confidence was refreshing. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you want that goes beyond professional success?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. Elena had spent so many years focused on climbing the corporate ladder that she'd never really considered what came after reaching the top. "I want to matter," she said quietly. "I want to build something that changes how people think about what's possible." Too many brilliant women accept positions that are safe instead of positions that are significant. And now, Elena met his gaze, recognizing that her answer would determine the direction of whatever was building between them. "Now, I want to see how significant we can be together." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither could cross back from. Elena had just committed herself to more than a business partnership, and the heat in Dominic's eyes told her he understood exactly what she was offering. "Careful, Elena," he said softly. "I have a tendency to take people at their word." "Good." She leaned back in her chair with deliberate confidence. "Because I don't say things I don't mean." The conversation that followed ranged across topics both personal and professional, revealing depths to Dominic that his public persona never hinted at. He was widely read, surprisingly philosophical about certain subjects, and possessed a dry sense of humor that emerged when he wasn't actively intimidating someone. But underneath the charm and intellectual compatibility, Elena sensed something wilder, an edge that suggested the civilized executive was carefully maintained facade. There were moments when his smile showed too many teeth, when his stillness seemed predatory rather than relaxed. "You're staring," Dominic observed as their dessert plates were cleared. "You're interesting to watch." Elena didn't bother to look away. "There are layers to you that don't match your public image." Such as the way you move like you're hunting even when you're sitting still. Such as how your voice changes when you're really focused on something. Such as whatever it is you're not telling me about yourself. Dominic's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Everyone has private aspects of their lives, Elena."
"True.
But not everyone looks like they're fighting to keep something caged." She leaned forward, studying his reaction. "What are you hiding, Dominic?" For a moment, she thought he might actually answer. His green eyes seemed to glow in the candlelight, and something flickered across his features that looked almost inhuman. Then his phone buzzed with an incoming call, and the moment shattered. "Marcus Webb," Dominic announced, checking the caller ID. "This should be interesting." He answered with casual authority.
"Webb.
"I was wondering when you'd call." Elena could hear the other man's voice through the phone, tight with barely controlled rage. Dominic's expression grew increasingly amused as Webb presumably vented about losing the Morrison deal. "Bad timing on your part," Dominic said when Webb paused for breath. Morrison's board was looking for a strategic partner, not a corporate raider. "Better luck next time." Webb's response was apparently profane enough to make Dominic chuckle. "Threats, Marcus? Really? I expected better from someone with your reputation." Elena watched Dominic's face change as Webb continued speaking, his amusement fading into something cold and dangerous. When he finally ended the call, his expression was pure predator calculation. "Problem?" Elena asked. "Webb thinks he can salvage this by going after our other interests. He's threatening to target 3 of my subsidiary companies with hostile takeover attempts." Dominic's voice carried an edge that made the hair on her arms stand up. He also made some very specific threats about what happens to people who interfere with his business. Elena felt her own predatory instincts sharpen. "What kind of threats?" "The kind that suggest he's done research on both of us." "Personal research?" Dominic's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus Webb just made a very serious mistake. The drive back to Elena's apartment was silent, but charged with dangerous energy. Dominic had switched from charming dinner companion to something far more lethal, and Elena found herself responding to his predatory mood with awakening hunger. When they reached her building, she found herself issuing an invitation that surprised them both. "Would you like to come up for coffee?" Dominic's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, and the heat she saw there made her pulse race. "Are we actually going to drink coffee, Elena?" "Probably not," she admitted. His smile was pure masculine satisfaction. Then yes. Elena's apartment was a reflection of her personality, sleek, sophisticated, and designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city, while carefully chosen art and furniture spoke of success, without ostentation. But as Dominic moved through her space with predatory grace, Elena realized that her sanctuary had just become a hunting ground. Nice, he observed, though his attention seemed focused on her rather than the decor. It suits you. Elena poured 2 glasses of wine, using the activity to steady her nerves. Having Dominic in her personal space felt different, more intimate and dangerous than any restaurant or office meeting. So, what do we do about Marcus Webb? She asked, settling onto the couch beside him. Dominic's smile held approval and something darker. I like that you assume this is a shared problem. Isn't it? He threatened both of us. Yes, but most people would distance themselves from potential danger. Step away and let me handle it alone. Dominic turned to face her fully, his intensity making the air between them crackle with electricity. You're not most people, are you, Elena? No, she said quietly. I'm not. Good. He reached out to trace one finger along her jawline, the contact sending fire racing through her nervous system. Because what I'm going to do to Marcus Webb requires someone who understands that sometimes civilization is just a polite fiction. The words should have alarmed her, but instead Elena felt her body respond with primitive recognition. There was something about Dominic that called to parts of herself she'd never acknowledged, primal instincts that had nothing to do with corporate strategy and everything to do with basic survival. What are you going to do? She whispered. I'm going to remind him that there are predators in this world he doesn't want to cross. Dominic's thumb traced across her lower lip, and Elena had to resist the urge to capture it with her teeth. But first, I'm going to claim what's mine. The possessive declaration sent liquid fire coursing through her veins. Elena should have protested the assumption of ownership, should have reminded him that she belonged to no one but herself. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "And what's yours, Dominic?" His smile was pure predator satisfaction as he leaned closer, close enough that his breath stirred against her lips. You are Elena. You've been mine since the moment you walked into my office and challenged my authority. The only question is whether you're brave enough to admit it. The kiss that followed was nothing like the controlled seduction on the restaurant rooftop. This was claiming, possession, demand wrapped in technique that left her breathless and clinging to his shoulders for balance. When they finally broke apart, Elena was gasping and trembling with need she'd never experienced before. Everything about Dominic seemed designed to awaken responses she hadn't known she possessed. Say it, he commanded softly, his voice rough with desire. Say you're mine. Elena stared up at him, recognizing that this was another point of no return. Once she gave him the surrender he was demanding, there would be no going back to professional boundaries and carefully controlled attraction. But looking into his eyes, she realized she didn't want boundaries anymore. She wanted to see where this dangerous chemistry would lead, wanted to discover what lay beneath Dominic's civilized surface. I'm yours, she whispered. The words were barely audible, but they hit Dominic like lightning. His eyes seemed to glow in the dim light, and when he kissed her again, it was with the hunger of a predator who had finally claimed his prey. As he swept her into his arms and carried her toward the bedroom, Elena realized that winning the Morrison deal had been just the beginning. The real conquest was happening now, in the darkness of her apartment, with a man who made her feel more alive and dangerous than she'd ever thought possible. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to who she'd been before Dominic Blackthorne walked into her life. And she wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 6. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the intoxicating scent of sandalwood and something wild that made her pulse race before she was fully conscious. She was in Dominic's penthouse bedroom, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than most people's monthly salary, with the memory of the most intense night of her life still burning through her veins. The sound of running water from the in-soot bathroom told her where he was, and Elena allowed herself a moment to process what had happened between them. She'd surrendered to Dominic Blackthorne in ways she'd never imagined possible, not just physically, but emotionally, professionally, completely. The independent woman who'd walked into his office 3 days ago would barely recognize who she'd become. The shower stopped, and Elena felt her body respond with anticipation despite being thoroughly exhausted from their night together. When Dominic emerged from the bathroom wearing nothing but a towel slung low around his hips, water droplets catching the morning light on his muscled chest, she had to remind herself to breathe. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, his voice carrying that low rumble that never failed to send electricity racing through her nervous system. "Sleep well?" Elena stretched languidly, noting how his eyes tracked the movement of the sheet across her bare skin with predatory focus. "Eventually, after you completely destroyed my ability to think coherently." His smile was pure masculine satisfaction as he moved to the walk-in closet that was larger than most apartments. "We have a busy day ahead. The Morrison integration meeting is at 10, and I want to review the quarterly projections before the board presentation." The casual shift from intimate to professional should have felt jarring, but Elena was beginning to understand that with Dominic, everything was interconnected. Business and pleasure weren't separate compartments. They were different expressions of the same driving ambition. "What aren't you telling me about today?" Elena asked, recognizing the subtle tension in his shoulders as he selected a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most cars. Dominic paused in his dressing, and when he turned to face her, his expression carried weight that made her pulse quicken with more than desire. "There are aspects of my business that require delicate handling. People I work with who don't always play by conventional rules." Elena sat up, suddenly alert to undercurrents she'd been missing. "What kind of people?" "The kind who prefer to operate in shadows," Dominic said carefully. "Who have interests that extend beyond profit margins and market share." Before Elena could probe deeper, his phone rang with the sharp tone he'd designated for priority calls. The transformation was immediate. Dominic shifted from mysterious lover to commanding executive in the space of a heartbeat. "Blackthorn." His voice carried absolute authority as he answered.
"When?"
"How many confirmed?" A pause, his expression darkening. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Elena watched him finish dressing with military efficiency, every movement precise and controlled. But underneath the corporate exterior, she could sense something prowling. A restlessness that spoke of barely contained power. "Problem?" she asked, already reaching for her clothes. "A situation at one of my subsidiary companies. 3 executives have been hospitalized, and there's evidence of industrial sabotage." Dominic's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "Someone just made the mistake of attacking my territory." The possessive fury in his voice sent shivers down Elena's spine. She'd seen Dominic in business mode, had witnessed his strategic brilliance and ruthless efficiency. But this was something different, something primal that made her instincts scream both danger and arousal. "I'm coming with you," Elena said, already selecting clothes from the wardrobe he'd somehow stocked with her size. "Elena." "We're partners," she interrupted firmly. "Whatever this is, we handle it together." Dominic's expression softened with something that looked like wonder. "Always so brave. It's one of the things I love about you." The casual declaration stopped Elena's heart mid-beat. Love. They hadn't spoken the word before, hadn't moved beyond the intensity of desire and professional partnership. But hearing it from his lips sent warmth flooding through her entire being. "Dominic." "Later," he said, already moving toward the door. "Right now, someone needs to learn what happens when they threaten what's mine." The drive through Manhattan morning traffic was tense with anticipation. Elena found herself studying Dominic's profile as he navigated the streets with predatory precision, noting details she'd somehow missed before. The way his hands gripped the steering wheel suggested strength that went beyond normal human capability. The way he tracked movement outside the windows spoke of heightened awareness that bordered on supernatural. "Tell me about these subsidiaries," Elena said, needing to understand the scope of what they were walking into. "Import-export businesses, mostly. Specialty items for clients who value discretion over conventional channels." Dominic's tone was carefully neutral, but Elena caught undertones that suggested layers of meaning she wasn't getting. "Legal discretion or illegal discretion?" His smile was sharp with approval for her directness. Legal, but operating in markets where traditional business practices aren't sufficient. My clients have specific needs that require creative solutions. Elena filed the information away, recognizing that she was getting glimpses of an empire far more complex than corporate acquisition and restructuring. Dominic Blackthorne wasn't just a successful businessman. He was something else entirely, operating by rules she didn't yet understand. The building they stopped at was unremarkable, a converted warehouse in an industrial district that looked abandoned except for the expensive cars in the parking lot and the subtle security cameras mounted at every entrance. Elena noted that the men standing near the loading docks weren't dressed like typical warehouse workers. They wore suits and moved with the kind of awareness that suggested military or law enforcement backgrounds. Private security, Dominic explained as they walked toward the main entrance. Some of my business associates prefer to avoid official channels when dealing with problems. Inside, the warehouse was a study in controlled chaos. Police tape blocked access to what looked like a manufacturing area, while men in expensive suits clustered around crime scene photos and medical reports. Elena recognized the type immediately, corporate troubleshooters who specialized in making problems disappear. Mr. Blackthorne. A silver-haired man approached with a kind of deference that suggested Dominic's authority here went far beyond normal business hierarchies. Thank you for coming so quickly. The situation is complicated. Show me, Dominic commanded, his voice carrying an edge that made several nearby conversations stop. Elena followed them through a maze of equipment and storage areas to what had clearly been the site of considerable violence. Industrial machinery was twisted beyond recognition. Metal surfaces bore deep gouges that looked almost like claw marks, and the concrete floor was stained with what appeared to be blood. 3 executives were found here at 6 a.m., the silver-haired man reported. All alive, but requiring immediate medical attention. Preliminary investigation suggests this wasn't random vandalism. Elena studied the destruction with growing alarm. Whatever had happened here involved forces capable of tearing apart steel and concrete with bare hands, or claws. The pattern of damage spoke of intelligence and purpose, not random violence. Any theories? Dominic asked, his tone deceptively casual. Someone with access to specialized equipment. Or... The man's voice trailed off, and Elena caught him glancing nervously at the other assembled security personnel. Or what? Elena asked when the silence stretched too long. Or someone with capabilities that don't fit conventional explanations, Dominic said quietly. The kind of capabilities that require specialized countermeasures. The words sent ice through Elena's veins. She was beginning to understand that whatever business Dominic was really in, it operated in spaces where normal rules didn't apply. What do you need me to do? She asked, recognizing that this crisis was about to test their partnership in ways she hadn't anticipated. Dominic's smile was sharp with predatory satisfaction. I need you to help me identify who had the resources and motivation to do this. Because whoever attacked my people just declared war on everything we're building together. As Elena looked around at the destruction, at the men with their careful neutral expressions and barely concealed weapons, she realized she was about to learn exactly how deep Dominic Blackthorne's secrets went, and whether she was strong enough to handle the truth. Chapter 7. 3 weeks into their partnership, Elena had learned to read Dominic's moods like a survival skill. There was corporate Dominic, all sharp suits and sharper strategies. There was intimate Dominic, who made her body sing with touches that seemed to know exactly what she needed. And there was dangerous Dominic, the version that emerged when his territory was threatened, when his eyes took on that strange glow and his voice dropped to something that was almost a growl. Tonight, as they reviewed quarterly projections in his penthouse office, Elena was seeing a 4th version she'd never encountered before, restless Dominic. He moved through the space with caged energy, pausing at windows to stare out at the city lights like he was hunting for something only he could sense. The Morrison integration is ahead of schedule, Elena reported, though she wasn't sure he was listening. Productivity is up 18% since we implemented the new systems. Dominic nodded absently, his attention fixed on something beyond the glass. In the reflection, Elena could see his profile, sharp cheekbones and predatory focus that made him look like he belonged in a different century, a different world entirely. Dominic. She closed her laptop and moved to where he stood. You've been distracted all week. What's going on? He turned to face her, and Elena caught her breath at the intensity burning in his eyes. There was something wild there, something that made her pulse quicken with a mixture of desire and instinctive wariness. There are things about me you don't understand yet, he said quietly. Things that might change how you feel about what we're building together. Elena's heart began to race, though whether from excitement or fear, she couldn't say. Then help me understand. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the space that separated them. Elena could feel the weight of secrets in the air, could sense that they were balanced on the edge of a revelation that would change everything. Then Dominic's phone rang, shattering the tension like glass. He answered with sharp efficiency. Blackthorn. His expression darkened as he listened. When? How many? Another pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Elena watched him transform back into the corporate predator, but something remained different, an edge of urgency that hadn't been there before. Problem, she asked. A situation at the Morrison plant. There's been some kind of incident with the night shift. Dominic was already reaching for his jacket, moving with that fluid grace that never failed to captivate her. I need to handle this personally. I'm coming with you. Elena was already gathering her things, instinctively knowing that whatever was happening, she belonged at his side. Dominic paused, and something flickered across his features. Elena, this might not be safe. The hesitation in his voice caught her attention. In all their time together, she'd never heard Dominic Blackthorn sound uncertain about anything. Since when do I choose safe over significant? Elena challenged. We're partners, remember? Whatever this is, we handle it together. His smile was sharp with approval and something darker. Always so brave. It's one of the things I love about you. The casual declaration stopped Elena in her tracks. They hadn't spoken of love, hadn't moved beyond the intensity of physical desire and professional partnership. But hearing the word from his lips sent heat flooding through her chest. Dominic. Later, he said, already moving toward the elevator. Right now, we have a crisis to manage. The drive to the Morrison plant took them through increasingly industrial neighborhoods, past warehouses and shipping facilities that looked abandoned in the pre-dawn darkness. Elena had visited the plant during daylight hours as part of her restructuring analysis, but at 3 a.m. it felt like a different world entirely. What kind of incident? She asked as they pulled through the security gates. Dominic's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, and Elena noticed he kept checking the mirrors like he expected to be followed. Equipment malfunction. Several workers injured, possible structural damage to the main production floor. But as they approached the building, Elena could see that whatever had happened was worse than a simple equipment failure. Emergency vehicles filled the parking lot, their flashing lights painting the industrial facade in alternating red and blue. Workers clustered in small groups, their faces pale with shock. Jesus, Elena breathed. How bad is it? Dominic parked near the main entrance and turned to face her, his expression deadly serious. Elena, I need you to promise me something. Whatever you see in there, whatever happens, you stay close to me. Don't wander off. Don't try to help on your own. Don't do anything that might put you in danger. The intensity of his demand caught her off guard. Dominic, what aren't you telling me? Promise me, he insisted, his voice carrying an authority that made her instinctively want to obey. I promise, Elena said, though every independent instinct she possessed rebelled against the agreement. The plant manager met them at the entrance, his face haggard with exhaustion and stress. Mr. Blackthorn, thank God you're here. It's bad. Elena followed Dominic through corridors she remembered from her daytime visits, but everything looked different in the harsh fluorescent lighting and chaos of emergency response. They passed paramedics treating workers for what looked like claw marks, deep gouges that seemed too large and too precise to have been caused by industrial equipment. What the hell happened here? Dominic asked, his voice carrying an edge that made the plant manager flinch. We're not sure. The night shift was running the new automated systems when something went wrong. There was noise from the main floor, growling, screaming. By the time security got there, the man's voice trailed off, and Elena could see him struggling to find words for whatever he'd witnessed. They reached the main production floor, and Elena gasped at the destruction. Machinery worth millions of dollars had been torn apart with impossible force, metal twisted into shapes that defied explanation. The concrete floor was gouged with what looked like claw marks, deep furrows that spoke of supernatural strength. But it was the smell that made her stomach clench with primitive fear, something wild and predatory that didn't belong in any human environment. "Sir." A security guard approached with obvious reluctance. "We found these." He handed Dominic a torn piece of fabric and what looked like a tuft of dark fur. Elena watched Dominic's face as he examined the evidence, seeing something that looked like recognition flicker across his features. "Clear the building," Dominic ordered, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Everyone out except essential personnel. And get me a complete list of who is working tonight." As the security team moved to comply, Elena grabbed Dominic's arm. "What is that? What kind of animal could do this kind of damage?" Dominic's eyes met hers, and Elena saw something in their depths that made her blood run cold. Knowledge, recognition, and beneath it all, guilt. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "But not here. Not now." They spent the next hour coordinating with emergency services and insurance investigators, but Elena's attention kept drifting back to those claw marks, to the impossible destruction that seemed to tell a story no one was willing to voice. By the time they returned to Dominic's penthouse, dawn was breaking over Manhattan. Elena's mind was racing with questions, theories, and growing certainty that whatever had happened at the Morrison plant was connected to the secrets Dominic had been keeping. "Talk," she demanded the moment they were alone. "Tell me what you know about what happened tonight." Dominic moved to the windows, staring out at the awakening city with the same restless energy she'd noticed earlier. "Some truths are dangerous, Selena. Once you know certain things, you can't unknow them. Try me." Elena moved to face him, recognizing that this was the moment when everything between them would either deepen or shatter. "I can handle more than you think." For a long moment, Dominic studied her face, as if memorizing every detail. Then he began to speak, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute truth. "There are things in this world that most people never see, Elena. Creatures that exist in the spaces between human understanding and ancient reality. Things that are older and more powerful than the civilizations we've built to keep them at bay." Elena felt her pulse quicken, though whether from fear or fascination, she couldn't say. "What kind of things?" "Shapeshifters. Beings that can take human form but whose true nature is something far more primal." Dominic's eyes seemed to glow in the morning light, and Elena caught her breath at the inhuman beauty of his features. "Werewolves, Elena. They're real, they're dangerous, and one of them just destroyed our factory." The revelation should have sent her running, should have made her question his sanity, his honesty, everything she thought she knew about the man she'd fallen for. Instead, Elena found herself thinking about all the things that had never quite made sense. Dominic's predatory grace, his uncanny ability to read people, the way he sometimes looked at her like he was seeing something beyond human perception. "You're one of them," she said quietly, understanding hitting her like lightning. "That's what you've been hiding." Dominic's smile was sharp with relief and apprehension. Alpha Prime of the Eastern Seaboard Pack, leader of over 300 wolves, and the only thing standing between human civilization and creatures that would tear it apart for sport. Elena stared at him, processing information that should have been impossible to accept. But looking at Dominic, really looking at him, she could see the truth in every line of his body, every predatory movement, every moment when his civilized mask had slipped to reveal something far more dangerous. "Show me," she whispered. "Elena." "Show me," she insisted. "If you want me to accept this, if you want me to be your partner in everything, then I need to see who you really are." Dominic's expression shifted, becoming something between hunger and terror. "You don't understand what you're asking. What I am when I let go of human form, it's not safe. I could hurt you without meaning to." Elena stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. You said I was under your protection. That means I trust you to keep me safe, no matter what form you're in. The trust in her words seemed to break something inside him. Dominic pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel the rapid beat of his heart. I love you, he said fiercely. God help us both. I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life. Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. I love you too. All of you. Human wolf, whatever you are. When Dominic stepped back, his eyes were glowing with inhuman light. Elena watched in fascination as his features began to shift, bones lengthening, muscles expanding, humanity giving way to something magnificent and terrifying. The transformation was beautiful and horrible, a symphony of power that left her breathless with awe. When it was complete, a massive wolf stood where Dominic had been. Coal-black fur, eyes like green fire, and presence that commanded submission from every living thing in its vicinity. Elena should have been terrified. Instead, she felt recognition deep in her bones, as if some primal part of her had been waiting her entire life for this moment. She knelt slowly, extending her hand toward the creature that was somehow still Dominic. When he moved closer, pressing his massive head against her palm, she felt the rightness of it sing through her entire being. My alpha, she whispered, not sure where the words came from but knowing they were absolutely true. The wolf made a sound that was part growl, part purr, and completely possessive. Then he was changing again, flowing back into human form with fluid grace. Mine, Dominic said as he pulled her into his arms. My mate, my equal, my everything. As he kissed her with desperate hunger, Elena realized that learning his secret hadn't changed anything fundamental between them. If anything, it had revealed the truth that had been there all along. They belonged to each other in ways that went beyond human understanding. The question now was whether she was strong enough to help him protect both their worlds from whatever had attacked the Morrison plant. Looking into his eyes, Elena felt her own predatory instincts sharpen with deadly purpose. She might be human, but she was his human. And anyone who threatened their pack would learn exactly how dangerous that could be. Chapter 8. The emergency pack meeting was held in the basement levels of Blackthorn Tower, in spaces Elena had never known existed. As the elevator descended past the parking garage into what appeared to be a series of purpose-built chambers, she realized Dominic's empire encompassed far more than corporate holdings. How long has this been going on? She asked, noting the sophisticated security systems and soundproofing that suggested decades of careful planning. The pack has been meeting here since I acquired the building, Dominic replied, his hand resting protectively on her lower back. It was one of the reasons I chose this location. The original construction included reinforced sublevels that were perfect for our needs. Elena processed the implications as they walked through corridors lined with what looked like medieval stonework. You built your corporate empire around pack requirements. I built an empire that could support both sides of my nature, Dominic corrected. The business provides resources and legitimate cover for activities that human authorities wouldn't understand. They entered a circular chamber that looked like a cross between a corporate boardroom and an ancient council hall. Stone walls rose to a vaulted ceiling, while modern technology provided lighting and communication systems. Around a massive table sat the most diverse group of people Elena had ever seen in one place, men and women of various ages and backgrounds, all radiating the same predatory energy she'd learned to associate with Dominic. All conversations stopped as they entered. Elena felt the weight of 23 pairs of eyes assessing her with mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and thinly veiled hostility. Brothers, sisters, Dominic's voice carried easily through the chamber, commanding immediate attention. Thank you for coming on such short notice. We have serious matters to discuss. A woman near the far end of the table stood with fluid grace. She was stunning in an otherworldly way, silver hair, pale blue eyes, and bone structure that belonged on a magazine cover. But there was something cold in her gaze as she looked at Elena. Alpha, she said, her voice carrying formal respect tinged with challenge. Before we begin, Perhaps you should explain why you've brought a human into pack business. Elena felt Dominic's tension increase, his protective instinct sharpening to a razor's edge. Victoria, Elena is my mate. She has every right to be here. The words sent a ripple of shock through the assembled wolves. Elena caught fragments of whispered conversation, disbelief, concern, and what sounded like outright opposition. Your mate? Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Forgive me, Alpha, but I don't smell wolf on her. Are you certain you haven't confused mate bond with simple human attraction? The insult hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Elena felt her own temper flare. She'd faced down hostile corporate boards and emerged victorious, and she wasn't about to be intimidated by supernatural politics. I'm certain, Dominic said, his voice carrying warning that made several pack members shift uncomfortably. And I'd suggest you remember that questioning your alpha's judgment is a dangerous precedent to set. A man Elena recognized from previous encounters at corporate events leaned forward. Thomas Chun, Morrison Industries' former CFO, and apparently more than just a financial executive. With respect, Dom, this raises questions about succession, pack security, the continuation of bloodlines, Thomas said carefully. A human mate can't provide the genetic diversity our pack needs for long-term survival. Elena realized she was witnessing a political challenge disguised as practical concern. These weren't just Dominic's pack members. They were his corporate executives, board members, and business partners. His two worlds were more integrated than she'd imagined. Thomas raises valid concerns, Victoria added smoothly. Perhaps we should table this discussion until you've had time to reconsider. There's nothing to reconsider. Dominic's voice dropped to the low growl that made Elena's pulse quicken. Elena is my mate. She's under pack protection, and anyone who questions that is questioning me directly. The chamber fell silent. Elena could feel the supernatural tension crackling through the air as dominant personalities faced off against each other. She'd walked into a power struggle that went far deeper than simple mate approval. If I may, Elena said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the stone chamber. I understand your concerns about having a human involved in pack affairs. But I'm already involved, whether I knew it or not. The attack on the Morrison plant threatened pack resources. The integration project I've been overseeing affects pack members' livelihoods. Like it or not, human and pack interests are interconnected through your alpha's business empire. Several pack members exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her directness. Elena pressed her advantage. I'm not asking you to trust me, because I'm Dominic's mate. I'm asking you to evaluate me based on results. I've increased Morrison's productivity by 18% in 3 weeks. I've identified and neutralized threats to your alpha's business interests. And last night, I was willing to walk into a potentially dangerous situation, because that's what partners do. The logic of her argument was undeniable, though Elena could see that Victoria wasn't ready to concede the point. Pretty words, the silver-haired woman said. But words won't protect you when the full moon calls and instincts override reason. Words won't help you understand pack law or supernatural politics. And words certainly won't give you the strength to stand beside an alpha when real threats emerge. Before Elena could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. She's already proven she can handle more than you think. Everyone turned toward the chamber's entrance, where a man Elena had never seen before was removing a long coat that looked like it had seen better days. He was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair and scars that spoke of a violent past. But what caught her attention was the way every wolf in the room straightened with respect. Marcus, Dominic said, genuine warmth entering his voice for the first time since they'd entered the chamber. I wasn't sure you'd make it. Wouldn't miss it, the newcomer replied, moving to take a seat near the head of the table. Especially not when I heard our alpha had found his mate. Elena watched the political dynamics shift as Marcus settled into his chair. Whatever his position in the pack hierarchy, it carried enough weight to make even Victoria reconsider her approach. Marcus Kane, Dominic said quietly to Elena. My father's former beta, and the closest thing to a mentor I've ever had. Understanding clicked into place. Marcus wasn't just another pack member. He was the elder statesman, the voice that carried weight when important decisions needed to be made. "So," Marcus said, his weathered gaze settling on Elena with keen intelligence. "You're the human who's got everyone worked up." Elena met his stare directly. "I'm the woman who's committed to building something significant with your alpha. Human or not, that's what matters." Marcus's smile held genuine amusement. "Backbone. Good. You'll need it." He turned to address the room. "Now, before we spend all night debating mating politics, perhaps we should focus on the immediate threat. Something attacked PAC assets last night. Something strong enough to tear apart industrial equipment and skilled enough to avoid our security measures." The shift in focus was immediate and dramatic. Elena watched as personal conflicts gave way to survival instincts, PAC members becoming a coordinated unit focused on protecting their territory. "Preliminary investigation suggests a lone wolf," Thomas reported. "Scent traces indicate someone we don't recognize, not from any of the allied PACs." "Rogue?" Victoria asked, her earlier hostility temporarily set aside. "Or scout," Dominic said grimly. "Testing our defenses, looking for weaknesses." "Elena's situation is complicated." "Show me," Dominic commanded, his voice carrying an edge that made several nearby conversations stop. Elena followed them through a maze of equipment and storage areas to what had clearly been the site of considerable violence. Industrial machinery was twisted beyond recognition. Metal surfaces bore deep gouges that looked almost like claw marks, and the concrete floor was stained with what appeared to be blood. 3 executives were found here at 6 a.m., the silver-haired man reported. "All alive, but requiring immediate medical attention. Preliminary investigation suggests this wasn't random vandalism." Elena studied the destruction with growing alarm. Whatever had happened here involved forces capable of tearing apart steel and concrete with bare hands or claws. The pattern of damage spoke of intelligence and purpose, not random violence. "Any theories?" Dominic asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Someone with access to specialized equipment." "Or..." The man's voice trailed off, and Elena caught him glancing nervously at the other assembled security personnel. "Or what?" Elena asked when the silence stretched too long. "Or someone with capabilities that don't fit conventional explanations," Dominic said quietly. "The kind of capabilities that require specialized countermeasures." The word sent ice through Elena's veins. She was beginning to understand that whatever business Dominic was really in, it operated in spaces where normal rules didn't apply. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, recognizing that this crisis was about to test their partnership in ways she hadn't anticipated. Dominic's smile was sharp with predatory satisfaction. "I need you to help me identify who had the resources and motivation to do this. Because whoever attacked my people just declared war on everything we're building together." As Elena looked around at the destruction, at the men with their careful neutral expressions and barely concealed weapons, she realized she was about to learn exactly how deep Dominic Blackthorne's secrets went, and whether she was strong enough to handle the truth. Chapter 9. Elena's first glimpse of Dominic in full alpha mode came during the emergency board meeting called to address what human executives believed was a series of unfortunate industrial accidents. She watched from her seat at his right hand as he commanded the room with an authority that went far beyond corporate hierarchy. This was primal dominance wrapped in a $10,000 suit. "The recent incidents at our facilities represent coordinated attacks on Blackthorne International's infrastructure," Dominic announced, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded storms. "We're dealing with industrial espionage backed by significant resources and inside knowledge." Board member Harrison Williams leaned forward with the expression of a shark scenting blood in the water. "Perhaps this is the time to consider defensive measures that don't rely on unconventional security arrangements." Elena caught the subtle emphasis on unconventional and felt her protective instincts sharpen. Williams had been making increasingly pointed comments about Dominic's security practices, and she suspected the man knew more about supernatural politics than he was admitting. "Our security arrangements," Elena said smoothly, "have prevented far worse damage than what we've experienced. Mr. Williams, unless you have specific recommendations beyond general skepticism, perhaps we should focus on solutions." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch as William's face flushed with barely controlled anger. Ms. Reyes, with respect, your involvement in security matters raises questions about conflicts of interest and divided loyalties. Before Elena could respond, Dominic's laugh cut through the boardroom like a blade, low, dangerous, and completely without humor. Harrison, I'd be very careful about questioning loyalty in this room, especially when some of us have proven our commitment through actions rather than words. The threat was subtle but unmistakable, and Elena watched Williams pale as he recognized that he'd overstepped some invisible boundary. Around the table, other board members shifted uncomfortably, sensing dangerous undercurrents they couldn't identify. If we could return to business matters, CFO Sarah Chen interjected diplomatically. The insurance claims are being processed, but we need to address the underlying security vulnerabilities. Elena pulled up tactical displays on the conference room screens, showing incident patterns that painted a disturbing picture of coordinated assault. These aren't random attacks. Someone's systematically targeting our most valuable assets with knowledge of our operational schedules, security protocols, and personnel deployment. Inside information, Dominic concluded, his pale green eyes scanning the room with predatory intensity. Someone with access to classified operational details has been feeding intelligence to our enemies. The accusation hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Elena watched each board member's reaction, noting micro-expressions that spoke of guilt, fear, and calculation. Williams looked genuinely surprised, which either meant he was innocent or an exceptional actor. That's a serious allegation, Williams said carefully. Do you have evidence to support such claims? Evidence is being gathered, Dominic replied with a kind of certainty that suggested consequences were inevitable. But I thought it appropriate to inform the board that we're treating these incidents as acts of war rather than unfortunate accidents. Elena felt her pulse quicken at his choice of words. To human ears, acts of war sounded like corporate hyperbole. But she was beginning to understand that in Dominic's world, business competition and territorial conflict were often the same thing. War seems like an overstatement, protested David Walsh, the marketing director whose understanding of conflict extended no further than advertising campaigns. Surely corporate espionage calls for legal responses, not military ones. Legal responses, Elena said with deadly precision, assume we're dealing with entities that respect legal boundaries. Recent evidence suggests our enemies operate by different rules entirely. She clicked to the next slide, showing photographs of the Morrison plant destruction that had been sanitized for human consumption but still conveyed the scope of violence involved. This level of damage requires either specialized equipment or, she paused meaningfully, capabilities that don't fit conventional explanations. Williams studied the photographs with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. What exactly are you suggesting, Ms. Reyes? Before Elena could answer, the conference room lights dimmed and emergency protocols activated with the precision of military coordination. Red warning lights bathed the room in hellish illumination while security systems engaged with electronic efficiency that spoke of threats far beyond corporate espionage. Lockdown initiated. Victoria's voice came through the communication system with deadly calm. Multiple breach points detected. All personnel to secure positions immediately. Elena felt combat adrenaline flood her system as board members who had no idea they were sitting in the middle of a supernatural war zone began demanding explanations. But her attention was focused on Dominic, who'd transformed from corporate executive to apex predator in the span of a heartbeat. Ladies and gentlemen, Dominic addressed the human board members with authority that brooked no argument. We're experiencing a security incident. Please remain in this room while our response teams handle the situation. This is unacceptable. Williams stood with obvious agitation, his earlier composure cracking under stress. If your business practices are attracting this kind of violence. Sit down, Harrison, Elena interrupted with cold authority that made the older man recoil. And stay quiet while the people who actually understand the situation manage our response. Through the conference room's reinforced windows, Elena could see figures moving through Blackthorn Tower with military precision. These weren't random attackers or corporate rivals. They were professional soldiers executing a coordinated assault designed to eliminate everyone inside. They're not here for trade secrets, Elena observed, studying tactical patterns with growing alarm. This is extermination. They want to destroy our entire leadership structure. Dominic moved toward the emergency armory concealed behind decorative paneling, his movements fluid with predatory grace. Elena, coordinate with our security teams while I... No. Elena's interruption carried absolute authority that made even an alpha pause. We handle this together or we don't handle it at all. I'm not hiding in a boardroom while you fight for everything we've built. Dominic's expression shifted through concern, pride, and finally deadly approval. Then gear up and stay close. These aren't corporate raiders, they're killers who've come to end us. As Elena strapped on tactical equipment that Victoria's team had somehow procured in her exact size, she caught William staring at them with a mixture of horror and fascination. "What the hell kind of business are you people really running?" he whispered. Elena met his gaze directly, recognizing that the corporate facade was about to be permanently stripped away. The kind that requires us to be more than our competitors ever imagined possible. The sound of gunfire echoed through the building's ventilation system, punctuated by inhuman snarls that belonged in nightmare rather than corporate headquarters. Elena checked her weapon with movements that had become automatic through Victoria's intensive training, her strategic mind already analyzing tactical options. "The elevator shafts are compromised," Marcus reported through their communication system. "Emergency stairwells are our only option for vertical movement." Elena studied building schematics on her tactical tablet, noting choke points and defensive positions with the same analytical precision she brought to market research. "They're herding us towards specific locations. This isn't random assault, it's orchestrated positioning. Someone knows our building layout better than they should," Dominic agreed grimly. "Emergency protocols, security measures, personnel deployment patterns." The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. Inside knowledge. Someone's been feeding them intelligence about our defensive capabilities. Before Dominic could respond, William spoke with a kind of desperate honesty that suggested he'd realized exactly how dangerous his situation had become. "If you're looking for inside information, you should know that 3 board members have been asking very specific questions about security protocols, personnel files, and operational procedures over the past month." Elena felt pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "Which 3? Morrison, Torres, and..." Williams swallowed hard.
"Me."
"But I swear I never provided information to anyone outside the company." "Then Morrison or Torres," Elena concluded with deadly certainty. "Or both." Dominic's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Looks like we have multiple problems to solve tonight." As they prepared to leave the relative safety of the boardroom for corridors that had become a war zone, Elena realized that the corporate strategist who'd walked into Dominic's office seeking a business partnership was about to be tested in ways no MBA program could have prepared her for. But looking at the man she loved, predator, alpha, and the most dangerous creature she'd ever encountered, Elena felt her resolve crystallize into something harder than steel. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. And anyone who threatened their empire would learn exactly what happened when human intelligence combined with supernatural strength decided to stop playing by civilized rules. The war for their territory was about to begin, and Elena Reyes intended to prove that she deserved to stand beside the most powerful alpha on the eastern seaboard. Even if it meant embracing the monster she was capable of becoming. Chapter 10. The emergency stairwell echoed with the sound of combat boots and inhuman snarls as Elena descended through what had once been the sanctuary of corporate power. Blackthorn Tower had been transformed into a war zone, each floor presenting new evidence of coordinated assault by forces that understood exactly how to maximize psychological pressure. Status report. Dominic commanded through their tactical communication system, his voice carrying alpha authority that cut through chaos like a blade. "Sub-basement levels are secure," Victoria replied with professional calm that couldn't quite hide underlying strain. "But they've cut power to the pack chambers and deployed some kind of jamming equipment that's interfering with our supernatural senses." Elena felt ice creep through her veins as the implications became clear. They're not just attacking the building, they're specifically targeting supernatural capabilities. Someone's given them detailed intelligence about werewolf weaknesses. More than intelligence, Marcus added grimly from his position 3 floors below. They're using silver-lace smoke grenades and sound frequencies that disorient enhanced hearing. This level of preparation suggests months of planning. Elena analyzed tactical data on her tablet while moving through corridors that belonged more in a nightmare than a corporate headquarters. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, while the smell of smoke and something metallic, silver, she realized with growing alarm, made her human senses recoil. "Dominic," she said quietly as they reached the 35th floor landing. "This isn't random corporate warfare. Someone's declared war on the entire supernatural power structure, using your empire as the primary target." Before he could respond, the stairwell door above them exploded inward with a shower of steel and concrete. Elena threw herself against the wall as automatic weapons fire raked the space where she'd been standing, bullets designed to kill werewolves chewing through reinforced materials like paper. "Contact!" Jacob Torres shouted through the communication system. "Multiple hostiles, military gear, coordinated assault patterns. They're pushing us toward the lower levels." Elena peered around the corner and caught her first glimpse of their enemies, 12 figures in advanced tactical armor moving with precision that spoke of both military training and supernatural enhancement. But what made her blood run cold was their casual efficiency, the way they advanced through the building like they owned it. "These aren't mercenaries," she realized aloud. "They're soldiers. Professional killers with institutional backing." Dominic's transformation was subtle but terrifying, humanity giving way to something far more dangerous as his predatory instincts took control. Then they're about to learn why it's dangerous to invade an alpha's territory. The battle that followed was unlike anything Elena had experienced in her corporate career. She watched Dominic move with inhuman speed and violence, his expensive suit somehow remaining immaculate while he tore apart enemies with bare hands. But it wasn't just supernatural strength that turned the tide. It was strategic thinking combined with predatory instincts. "They're hurting us," Elena observed as she coordinated tactical communications while providing covering fire. "Forcing us towards specific locations instead of trying to eliminate us outright." "Capture rather than kill," Marcus agreed grimly. "Someone wants us alive for questioning." The realization sent new urgency through Elena's strategic mind. This wasn't assassination, it was acquisition, an attempt to gather intelligence about supernatural operations that could threaten every pack on the eastern seaboard. "Victoria," Elena commanded through the communication system, "I need you to implement Protocol 7. Full data purge of all systems, maximum security lockdown, and activation of our dead man switches." "Elena," Dominic's voice carried concern that cut through combat adrenaline. "Protocol 7 will destroy our entire intelligence network. Years of carefully gathered information will be better destroyed than captured," Elena finished with deadly certainty. "If they get access to our files, every supernatural community from here to Boston becomes a target." As Victoria implemented the data purge that would effectively lobotomize Blackthorn International's information networks, Elena felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. The attacks on Morrison Industries, the systematic targeting of allied facilities, the coordinated assault on their headquarters, all of it had been designed to force them into exactly this position. "It's a trap," she breathed, understanding flooding through her with horrifying clarity. "Everything that's happened has been designed to get us here, in this building, at this moment." Dominic's expression darkened with predatory calculation. "Then whoever's orchestrating this is about to learn why it's dangerous to trap apex predators." They fought their way through corridors that had once represented corporate power, now transformed into killing fields where survival required embracing violence Elena had never imagined herself capable of. She moved through smoke and gunfire with tactical precision, her corporate training combining with combat instincts awakened by weeks of preparation for exactly this kind of warfare. "Movement on the executive floor," Jacob reported breathlessly. "Someone's accessed Harrison Williams' office. Encrypted communication equipment, tactical displays showing our defensive positions." Elena felt rage explode through her chest as the final piece of betrayal became clear. Williams. He's been coordinating the assault from inside our own building. The elevator ride to the executive level felt like ascending into hell itself. Elena's tactical gear was torn and bloodstained, her ammunition running dangerously low, but her resolve had crystallized into something harder than steel. Harrison Williams had betrayed everything they'd built together, and she intended to extract payment in blood. They found Williams in his office, surrounded by sophisticated communication equipment and tactical displays that showed the real scope of the assault, not just on Blackthorn Tower, but coordinated attacks on supernatural assets across 3 states. But he wasn't alone. 3 figures in expensive suits stood with him, their inhuman grace and predatory stillness marking them as supernatural beings who'd chosen to work with human authorities against their own kind. Elena recognized the type immediately. Wolves who'd traded pack loyalty for personal advantage, traitors willing to destroy their own species for profit. Dominic, Williams said with false cordiality that couldn't hide his terror as they entered. I was hoping we could discuss terms for your surrender. Elena stepped forward with predatory confidence, her weapon trained on the man who'd sold out everyone she cared about. The only terms we're discussing involve how slowly you want to die. Williams' composure cracked completely as he realized that corporate negotiations had given way to something far more primitive. You can't just, this is still a business, there are legal considerations. Legal considerations? Elena laughed with genuine amusement that made Williams recoil in horror. Harrison, you just coordinated a military assault on civilian targets. You forfeited legal protections the moment you chose warfare over corporate competition. One of the supernatural traitors stepped forward with predatory arrogance. Ms. Reyes, you're operating under several misconceptions about your position here. We represent interests that extend far beyond. Elena put 3 rounds center mass before he could finish the sentence, her tactical training combining with rage to create lethality that surprised even her. Anyone else want to explain my position to me? The remaining traitors moved with supernatural speed, but Dominic was faster, eliminating them with violence that was both beautiful and horrible in its efficiency. When silence returned to Williams' office, Elena found herself standing over the man who'd betrayed everything they'd built. Please, Williams whispered, genuine terror replacing his earlier arrogance. I never meant for it to go this far. They said it would just be corporate restructuring, hostile takeover at worst. But you knew better, Elena said quietly, her weapon steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. You knew Dominic was more than just another CEO. You knew this building housed more than corporate offices. And you sold that information to people who wanted to destroy us. Williams' death was quick and efficient, 3 rounds that ended his betrayal with the same precision Elena had once brought to quarterly reports. As his body slumped over the tactical displays that had coordinated the assault on their home, she felt something fundamental shift inside herself. The corporate strategist who'd walked into Dominic's office seeking a business partnership was gone forever, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. She was no longer just Dominic's mate or business partner. She was his equal in every way that mattered, including the capacity for violence when their territory was threatened. It's finished, Dominic said quietly, surveying the destruction of Williams' command center with predatory satisfaction. Elena looked out at the city lights that represented territory they defended with blood and determination, recognizing that victory had come at a price she was only beginning to understand. No, she corrected with deadly certainty. It's just beginning. We've proven that human intelligence and supernatural strength can build something that no enemy can destroy. But now we need to show the world what happens to anyone who tries. As dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold that matched the fire burning in Elena's chest, she realized that the war for their empire had revealed something she'd never expected to discover about herself. She wasn't just strong enough to stand beside an alpha predator, she was strong enough to become one herself. The question now was what kind of empire they would build together and how many enemies they would need to destroy to protect it. But looking at Dominic as he surveyed their domain from windows that had survived corporate warfare and supernatural assault, Elena felt certainty settle into her bones like destiny itself. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And anyone who threatened what they'd built would learn exactly how dangerous it was to challenge apex predators who'd learned to hunt as a pack. The real conquest was just beginning. Chapter 11. The aftermath of the Blackthorn Tower assault revealed the true scope of what they were facing. Elena stood in the ruins of what had once been Dominic's executive conference room, reviewing intelligence reports that painted a picture of coordinated warfare across the entire eastern seaboard's supernatural community. 17 facilities hit simultaneously, she reported, her voice carrying the controlled calm she'd perfected during corporate crises. Banks, shipping companies, tech firms, manufacturing plants, someone systematically targeting the economic infrastructure that allows supernatural communities to operate in the human world. Dominic moved through the destroyed space with predatory restlessness, his expensive suit replaced by tactical gear that made him look like what he truly was, an apex predator preparing for war. This isn't random terrorism. Someone's trying to force us into the open, make us visible to human authorities who can't ignore supernatural existence anymore. Elena pulled up financial data on her ruggedized tablet, the corporate strategist in her analyzing patterns that would have impressed her MBA professors if they'd been equipped to understand warfare between species. The coordinated timing suggests military-level planning and resources. Whoever's behind this has funding comparable to government operations. Or is government operations, Victoria added grimly as she entered with a tactical report that made Elena's blood run cold. I've been monitoring law enforcement communications. Homeland Security has activated specialized units that officially don't exist, teams trained in unconventional threat assessment. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. They know. The human government knows about supernatural communities, and they're moving to contain or eliminate what they see as a threat to national security. Marcus Kane appeared in the doorway, his weathered face grim with the kind of knowledge that came from decades of pack politics. It's worse than that. I've got contacts in federal agencies who've been feeding me intelligence for years. 3 days ago, those contacts went dark. Complete radio silence from people who've never missed a check-in. Elena felt her strategic mind shift into crisis management mode, analyzing threats and opportunities with the same precision she'd once brought to corporate restructuring. But the stakes were no longer measured in profit margins. They were measured in the survival of an entire hidden civilization. We need allies, she concluded with deadly certainty. Every pack, every supernatural community, every creature that has a stake in maintaining the balance between our worlds. This isn't about territory anymore. It's about species survival. Dominic's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Then we call a gathering. Every alpha, every leader, every power broker who understands that their independence depends on our ability to coordinate a response. Elena had thought she understood supernatural politics, but the gathering that convened in Blackthorn Tower's sub-basement levels 3 days later revealed depths of complexity that made corporate board meetings seem like kindergarten playground disputes. Around the massive circular table sat representatives of communities she'd never imagined: werewolf alphas, vampire covens, fey nobility, and creatures whose very existence challenged everything she'd thought she knew about the world. The air crackled with supernatural energy and political tension that made her human instincts scream warnings about predators in enclosed spaces. The attacks aren't random, Elena began, addressing the assembly with the same authority she'd once used to present quarterly reports to hostile boards. Someone's coordinating a systematic campaign to destroy the economic foundations that allow supernatural communities to coexist with human civilization. A vampire who looked like he'd stepped out of a Renaissance painting leaned forward with predatory interest. And you believe human authorities are involved? That they've discovered our existence and decided we represent a threat? Elena pulled up intelligence data on the room's display systems, showing patterns of assault that revealed both intimate knowledge of supernatural capabilities and access to military resources. The evidence suggests a coordinated effort between human agencies and supernatural traders who've chosen collaboration over community loyalty. The room erupted in angry voices as representatives began pointing fingers and making threats that would have resulted in bloodshed if not for the neutral ground protocols that governed such gatherings. Elena watched Dominic restore order with nothing more than a look, alpha dominance that transcended species boundaries. "Enough," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "We don't have time for territorial disputes or ancient grudges. Our enemies are counting on us to destroy each other while they prepare the final phase of whatever they're planning." A Fey lord whose beauty was sharp enough to cut glass spoke with the kind of authority that made reality bend around his words. "What do you propose, Alpha Blackthorn? That we abandon centuries of careful secrecy and reveal ourselves to human authorities on the hope that cooperation will spare us extinction." Elena stepped forward, recognizing the political moment that would determine whether supernatural communities survived as independent powers or were destroyed by forces they'd underestimated. "I propose that we stop pretending this is about secrecy and start treating it as what it really is, a war for survival that requires us to use every advantage we possess." The silence that followed was heavy with implications none of them wanted to confront. Elena was suggesting something that violated every principle of supernatural coexistence: active warfare against human authorities using capabilities that would make concealment impossible. "You're talking about exposure," the vampire observed with deadly calm. "Complete revelation of our existence to a human population that's been taught to fear everything they don't understand." "I'm talking about survival," Elena corrected with certainty that surprised even her. "Because our enemies have already made that choice for us. The question is whether we control the revelation or let them use it to justify our elimination." Dominic's expression held pride and something darker as he watched her address the most powerful supernatural leaders on the continent. "Elena's right. We can hide and hope our enemies lose interest, or we can remind the world why apex predators are called apex." The debate that followed was unlike anything Elena had witnessed in her corporate career. These weren't executives arguing about market share. These were immortal beings discussing strategies that would reshape the fundamental relationship between species. But underneath the supernatural politics, Elena recognized familiar patterns of power, negotiation, and the careful balance between cooperation and self-interest that governed all complex organizations. Data processing capabilities, everything modern warfare requires. As the gathering developed their strategy, Elena felt the same dangerous excitement she'd experienced during the most challenging corporate acquisitions. But this time, the stakes went far beyond profit margins and market domination. They were planning the most complex campaign in supernatural history, a war that would either preserve their hidden civilization or expose them to a human world that might not be ready for the truth about what shared their planet. "Timeline?" asked the Fey Lord as they finalized their approach. 72 hours, Dominic replied with alpha certainty. "Our enemies expect us to remain defensive while they complete whatever they're planning. Instead, we're going to hunt them down and remind them why it was a mistake to threaten apex predators." Elena felt her pulse quicken with anticipation as the gathering dispersed and allies departed to prepare for war. She'd helped orchestrate corporate battles worth billions of dollars, but nothing compared to the campaign they'd just planned. "Are you ready for this?" Dominic asked as they returned to his penthouse office, now converted into a war room that would have made military strategists proud. Elena looked out at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about the life she'd had before walking into his office, seeking a business partnership. Safe, predictable, limited by human conventions and corporate hierarchies. Then she looked at the man she loved, Alpha, Predator, and the most dangerous creature she'd ever encountered, and felt her decision crystallize with deadly clarity. "I'm not just ready," Elena said with conviction that surprised them both. "I'm hungry for it. They threatened our territory, our people, our future together. Time to show them what happens when human intelligence combines with supernatural strength to protect what we've built." Dominic's kiss was fierce with possession and promise, sealing their commitment to a war that would determine not just their survival, but the future balance of power between species. When they broke apart, Elena knew there was no going back to who she'd been before. She was no longer just a brilliant corporate strategist. She was the mate of an alpha predator, and she intended to prove herself worthy of that position. The hunt was about to begin, and Elena Reyes had never felt more dangerous or more alive. Their enemies had made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated what she was willing to become to protect what she loved. The war for supernatural survival was about to teach them exactly how costly that mistake would be. Chapter 12. The final battle began at dawn on the third day, not with gunfire or supernatural violence, but with a coordinated financial assault that brought the global markets to their knees in under 6 hours. Elena orchestrated the attack from Blackthorn Tower's rebuilt command center, her fingers dancing across multiple keyboards as she wielded economic warfare like a surgeon's scalpel. Rothschild Holdings just lost $2 billion in derivative positions, she reported with predatory satisfaction. Their subsidiary accounts are freezing faster than their legal team can file injunctions. Dominic stood behind her chair, his presence radiating the kind of alpha dominance that made the air itself seem charged with dangerous energy. Around them, the command center hummed with activity as supernatural allies executed the most complex campaign in recorded history, a war fought simultaneously in corporate boardrooms, government agencies, and the shadows where monsters decided the fate of civilization. Phase 2 is operational, Victoria announced from her tactical station. FBI Director Morrison's private jet just experienced catastrophic engine failure over the Atlantic. His backup, Deputy Director Chen, is discovering that her bank accounts have been frozen pending investigation of terrorist financing allegations. Elena felt a surge of dark satisfaction as she watched their enemies' power structures collapse with the same methodical precision she'd once brought to corporate restructuring. But this time, the stakes were measured in species survival rather than quarterly profits. The Swiss accounts? Dominic asked. Liquidated 20 minutes ago, Elena replied, her voice carrying the controlled calm of someone who'd just moved $50 billion with a few keystrokes. Every penny of their operational funding has been redistributed to humanitarian organizations worldwide. Let them explain to their superiors why their black budget just became a very public donation to refugee relief. The beauty of their strategy lay in its elegant simplicity. Instead of fighting a war that would expose supernatural communities to human authorities, they'd simply removed their enemy's ability to wage war at all. Corporate espionage, financial manipulation, and political pressure applied with surgical precision had achieved what military force never could. Alexandra's teams have secured the Atlanta facility, Marcus reported through their communication network. The Vampire Coven's eliminated resistance in under 10 minutes, and they're downloading everything from the servers before implementing our sanitization protocols. Elena studied tactical displays that showed similar operations across 12 states, each one targeting the infrastructure their enemies had built to coordinate their war against supernatural communities. But unlike their opponents, Elena's forces fought with the precision of apex predators who understood that true power came from controlling systems rather than destroying them. Any word from the Fae contingent? Dominic asked. They've completed their objective, came the reply in a voice like silver bells wrapped in razor wire. The Fae Lord materialized in their command center with the casual disregard for physics that made Elena's human brain ache. Senator Reynolds and his Supernatural Threat Assessment Committee have experienced a collective change of heart regarding the wisdom of their current policies. Elena didn't ask what methods the Fae had used to achieve that change of heart. Some victories were better left unexamined by human moral standards. That leaves the primary target, she said, pulling up intelligence data that had taken weeks to compile. General Morrison and his Special Operations Unit. The people who started this war in the first place. Dominic's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I've been saving the best for last. Morrison thinks he's safe in his underground bunker, protected by technology designed to contain supernatural threats. He's about to learn why that's a very dangerous assumption. The assault on the government facility hidden beneath a corporate office park in Virginia was Elena's masterpiece of strategic planning, not a military attack, but a hostile corporate takeover executed with supernatural efficiency. She'd spent 2 days crafting the legal framework that would make their invasion technically lawful, using shell companies, regulatory loopholes, and bureaucratic manipulation to turn government property into private territory. Blackthorn International's acquisition of Meridian Security Solutions was finalized 30 minutes ago, Elena announced as their convoy approached the target facility. As of now, we own the building, the land, and everything on the premises. General Morrison is trespassing on private property. Dominic's laugh was rich with predatory satisfaction. Only you could turn a military assault into a real estate transaction. The facility's security systems had been designed to keep supernatural creatures out, but they'd never been tested against supernatural creatures who also happened to be legitimate property owners backed by teams of lawyers and federal marshals. Elena watched with professional pride as resistance crumbled under the weight of legal documentation rather than superior firepower. General Morrison, she announced as they entered the facility's command center, surrounded by the kind of technology that belonged in science fiction films. I'm Elena Reyes, Chief Strategic Officer of Blackthorn International. You're currently occupying our property without authorization. Morrison was exactly what Elena had expected. Military bearing, intelligent eyes, and the kind of absolute certainty that came from believing his cause justified any means necessary. But she could see the moment when he realized that his carefully planned war had become something else entirely. Ms. Reyes, he said with professional courtesy that couldn't hide his desperation. I think there's been some kind of legal error. This is a classified federal facility. Was a classified federal facility, Elena corrected smoothly. Now it's private property owned by a corporation that employs approximately 3,000 individuals, many of whom belong to communities you've been systematically targeting for elimination. She gestured to the supernatural allies who'd accompanied them, werewolf alphas in business suits, vampire lords who looked like investment bankers, fey nobles whose beauty made reality bend around them. The message was clear. The hidden world Morrison had tried to destroy was more integrated with human civilization than he'd ever imagined. You're making a mistake, Morrison said, though his voice carried the hollow ring of a man who'd realized his position was hopeless. These creatures represent an existential threat to human civilization. They have capabilities that we've been using to build rather than destroy, Dominic interrupted, his alpha presence filling the command center with dangerous energy. Corporate empires, technological innovations, artistic achievements, scientific breakthroughs, supernatural communities have been contributing to human civilization for centuries. Elena pulled up displays showing the true scope of supernatural integration with human society. Fortune 500 companies run by werewolf alphas, technology platforms developed by fey innovators, medical breakthroughs achieved by vampire researchers. The revelation was staggering in its implications. The question, General, Elena said quietly, is whether you're willing to acknowledge that your threat assessment was based on incomplete information, or whether you prefer to continue a war that was over before it began. Morrison's surrender was as professional as his resistance had been hopeless. Faced with overwhelming evidence that supernatural communities were integral to the civilization he'd sworn to protect, he chose adaptation over annihilation. Terms, he asked simply. Elena smiled with the satisfaction of someone who just executed the most complex negotiation of her career. Full amnesty for supernatural communities in exchange for continued cooperation with human authorities. Formal recognition of our right to exist, and establishment of liaison protocols that prevent future misunderstandings. And if I refuse? Dominic's transformation was subtle but unmistakable, humanity giving way to something far more dangerous as his predatory nature took control. Then you discover why it was a mistake to declare war on apex predators who've learned to fight with both claws and corporate law. 3 hours later, Elena stood in the ruins of the command center that had been designed to coordinate the elimination of supernatural communities, watching as evidence of government conspiracy disappeared into the same bureaucratic maze that had birthed it. But unlike their enemies' clumsy attempts at concealment, Elena's sanitization left no traces that couldn't be explained by routine administrative oversight. It's finished, Dominic said quietly, pulling her into his arms with the gentleness of someone who understood exactly what she'd sacrificed to stand beside him. Elena looked out at the Virginia countryside that stretched beyond reinforced windows, thinking about the corporate strategist who'd walked into his office seeking a business partnership and been transformed into something she'd never imagined possible. "No," she corrected with conviction that surprised them both. "It's just beginning. We've proven that human intelligence and supernatural strength can build something that no enemy can destroy. But now we need to show the world what we can accomplish when we stop hiding what we are." As they returned to Manhattan in Dominic's private jet, flying over a country that remained blissfully unaware of how close it had come to a war between species, Elena felt the truth settle into her bones with absolute certainty. She'd found her alpha, claimed her place in a world beyond human understanding, and proven that sometimes the most dangerous predator of all was the one nobody saw coming. The corporate strategist had become something far more powerful, the mate of an apex predator and the architect of a new age where supernatural communities would no longer need to hide in shadows. 6 months later, Elena Reyes Blackthorne stood before the United Nations General Assembly, delivering a presentation that would reshape humanity's understanding of the world they inhabited. Behind her, holographic displays showed the true scope of supernatural integration with human civilization, the corporations, the innovations, the cultural achievements that had been hiding in plain sight for centuries. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority she'd perfected in corporate boardrooms and supernatural war councils, "I'm here to introduce you to your partners in building a better future. They've been working alongside you for generations, and it's time you met them officially." As representatives of werewolf packs, vampire covens, fae courts, and dozens of other supernatural communities took their places beside her on the stage, Elena felt Dominic's pride and love through the mate bond that connected them in ways beyond human comprehension. The revelation sent shockwaves through human civilization, but not the chaos and violence their enemies had predicted. Instead, humanity proved remarkably adaptable when presented with evidence that their supernatural neighbors had been contributing to progress rather than hindering it. That evening, Elena stood on the balcony of their penthouse suite overlooking Manhattan, the city lights reflecting off her wedding ring, a band of metal that had been forged with techniques that combined human craftsmanship with supernatural artistry. "Any regrets?" Dominic asked as he joined her, his arms wrapping around her waist with possessive tenderness. Elena thought about the question seriously, considering the life she'd left behind, the safe corporate career, the predictable challenges, the limited horizons of purely human ambition. "Just one," she said finally, turning in his arms to meet his eyes with complete honesty. "I regret that it took me so long to find you." Dominic's kiss was everything she'd ever wanted: passion and promise, dominance and devotion, the perfect balance of human emotion and supernatural intensity. When they broke apart, Elena knew that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together. She was no longer just Elena Reyes, corporate strategist. She was Elena Reyes Blackthorne, mate to an alpha predator, architect of supernatural human cooperation, and the woman who'd helped reshape the world by refusing to accept limitations on what was possible. The billionaire alpha had claimed his mate, but more importantly, she had claimed her destiny. And their empire, built on love, defended with blood, and sustained by the unbreakable bond between two apex predators who'd learned to hunt as one, would endure for centuries to come.
The end.